What if Harry Potter found a mirror that showed the future instead of desire? Chapter 1, Reflections of Tomorrow. Harry's footsteps echoed down the empty corridor as he sprinted away from Filch's raspy calls. His heart hammered against his ribs, partly from running and partly from the thrill of another late-night adventure gone sideways. Students out of bed. I'll find you. Filch's voice bounced off the stone walls. Harry ducked behind a suit of armor, clutching the Marauder's map. He'd left his invisibility cloak back in his trunk, stupid mistake, and now he was playing the world's most dangerous game of hide-and-seek with Hogwarts' cantankerous caretaker. The map showed Filch and Mrs. Norris closing in from different directions. Brilliant, Harry muttered under his breath. Just brilliant. He needed somewhere to hide, and fast. Scanning the corridor, his eyes landed on a door he couldn't remember seeing before. Hogwarts was funny like that, sometimes things appeared exactly when you needed them. Without hesitation, Harry slipped inside and closed the door silently behind him. The room was small and dusty, clearly unused for years. Moonlight filtered through a single window, casting long shadows across the stone floor. Harry held his breath as he heard Filch shuffling past outside. Come out, wherever you are," Filch sang in that creepy way of his. Harry backed further into the room, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. That's when he saw it, a tall object covered in a faded purple cloth standing against the far wall. Something about it seemed familiar. Once Filch's footsteps faded, Harry approached the covered object. It was tall, about 7 feet, with an ornate frame visible beneath the cloth. His fingers reached out and grabbed the fabric, hesitating just a moment before pulling it away. The cloth fell to the floor with a soft whoosh, revealing an elegant mirror with a golden frame. Harry's breath caught in his throat as memories of his first year flooded back. Was this the mirror of Erised again? Had Dumbledore moved it? But as he looked closer, Harry realized this mirror was different. The inscription along the top wasn't the backward phrase he remembered from the Mirror of Erised. Instead, it read, Ostendo quid veniet, non quid cupis. Latin? Harry whispered. His Latin was rubbish, but even he could tell this wasn't the same inscription. He stepped closer, half expecting to see his parents appear beside his reflection like they had years ago. But what he saw made him stumble backward in shock. In the mirror stood Harry, but not as he was now. The reflection showed him a few years older, standing triumphant with his wand pointed down at a fallen Voldemort. Around him, his friends celebrated, alive and unharmed. The scene was so vivid, so real, that Harry reached out to touch the glass. The moment his fingers made contact, the image rippled and changed. Now he saw himself walking through the Hogwarts corridors tomorrow morning, bumping into Neville, who would drop a stack of herbology books. One book would slide across the floor and stop at Professor McGonagall's feet as she rounded the corner. Harry pulled his hand away as if burned. This wasn't the Mirror of Erised. This mirror wasn't showing his deepest desire, it was showing the future. Bloody hell, he whispered. For the next hour, Harry sat cross-legged on the dusty floor, watching different scenes play out in the mirror. Some seemed to be happening tomorrow, others much further in the future. He saw himself in potions class, saw Snape taking points from Gryffindor when Seamus Cauldron exploded. He saw a Quidditch match against Ravenclaw where Cho Chang nearly caught the snitch before he did. He saw himself arguing with Umbridge, and later celebrating something with the DA in the room of requirement. It was nearly 3 in the morning when Harry finally tore himself away from the mirror. He needed to get back to his dormitory before someone noticed he was missing. With one last look at the mysterious mirror, Harry slipped out of the room and made his way back to Gryffindor Tower, his mind racing with possibilities. You found what? Harry winced at Ron's volume, glancing around the great hall to see if anyone had heard. Thankfully, breakfast was its usual chaotic mess of clattering plates and chattering students. Keep your voice down, Harry hissed. I'm serious. It showed me things that I think are going to happen. Hermione looked up from her porridge, eyebrows knitted together in that way that meant her brain was working overtime. Harry, that's impossible. Even magical divination has limitations. A mirror that clearly shows the future. That goes beyond any magic I've read about. Well, I'm going to find out today, Harry said, taking a bite of toast. According to the mirror, Neville's going to drop his herbology books right in front of McGonagall after breakfast. Ron snorted. That's not exactly prophecy material, mate. Neville drops something at least 3 times a day. In front of McGonagall? While she's coming around that specific corner? Harry challenged. Look, I know how it sounds, but I'm telling you, this isn't like Professor Trelawney's vague predictions or tea leaves. I saw it clearly. Hermione closed her book with a snap. Harry, you need to be careful. If, and that's a big if, this mirror actually shows the future, interfering with events could have serious consequences. Time is not something to be trifled with. Remember 3rd year? Harry nodded, remembering the time turner all too well. I'm not planning to interfere with anything yet. I just want to see if what it showed me comes true. They finished breakfast quickly and headed toward their first class. Harry deliberately slowed his pace as they approached the corridor where the mirror had shown the incident would occur. There's Neville, Harry whispered, pointing ahead where their friend was indeed walking with a stack of herbology books clutched against his chest. And there's McGonagall, Ron added, pointing to the intersecting corridor where their head of house was just appearing. Hermione grabbed Harry's arm. This doesn't prove anything. Like Ron said, Neville drops things all the time. But Harry was already counting down in his head. 3, 2, 1. As if on cue, Trevor the Toad suddenly hopped out from Neville's pocket, causing him to jerk in surprise. The books tumbled from his grasp, scattering across the stone floor. One particularly thick volume slid several feet, coming to a perfect stop against Professor McGonagall's pointed boots. Ron's mouth fell open. Hermione's grip on Harry's arm tightened. Mr. Longbottom, McGonagall sighed, picking up the book and handing it back. Do try to keep a firmer hold on both your books and your amphibian. Yes, Professor. Sorry, Professor, Neville mumbled, his face flushed as he gathered his things. Once McGonagall was out of earshot, Ron turned to Harry with wide eyes. Okay, that was weird. That was exactly what I saw in the mirror, Harry said, trying to keep the excitement from his voice. Exactly. Hermione still looked skeptical. It could be coincidence. I saw other things too, Harry insisted. Seamus is going to blow up his cauldron in potions today, and Snape's going to take 15 points from Gryffindor for it. Again, not exactly breaking the laws of probability there, Harry, Hermione said with a small smile. Seamus blows something up in nearly every potions class. Fine, Harry said. Then how about this? The mail will arrive during lunch instead of breakfast today because there's a storm delaying the owls. And Malfoy's going to get a package of sweets that Crabbe will try to steal, and Malfoy will hex his fingers together for it. That got their attention. Those were specific events that couldn't be explained away as everyday occurrences. If all that happens exactly as you've said, Hermione conceded, then maybe there's something to this mirror after all. By the end of the day, both Ron and Hermione were convinced. Seamus had indeed blown up his cauldron, though Snape had taken 20 points rather than 15. The mail had arrived during lunch due to the unexpected storm, and Malfoy had hexed Crabbe exactly as Harry had described. Every prediction had come true, with only minor variations. After dinner, Harry led his friends through the castle corridors toward the room where he'd found the mirror. I still don't understand how this is possible, Hermione said as they walked. True divination of specific events goes against everything I've read about magical theory. Maybe the books are wrong, Ron suggested, earning a glare from Hermione. Harry kept checking the Marauders' map as they navigated the castle. It should be right around this corner, wait. He stopped suddenly, staring at the map in confusion. What's wrong? Ron asked, peering over his shoulder. The room, it's not there anymore. They turned the corner to find a solid wall where Harry was certain a door had been the night before. "Are you sure this is the right spot?" Hermione asked. "Positive," Harry said, running his hand along the wall. "The mirror was right here." Ron frowned. "Maybe it's like the room of requirement. You know, appears when you need it." "Maybe," Harry agreed. "But I wasn't specifically looking for a hiding place with a mirror in it. I just needed somewhere to hide from Filch." Hermione's brow furrowed in thought. "What if you were looking for something, Harry? Not consciously, perhaps, but deep down." "Like what?" "An advantage," she said quietly. "Something to help against Voldemort." Harry didn't answer immediately. Was that true? Had he been so desperate for any edge in this impossible fight that Hogwarts itself had provided one? "Let's try again tomorrow," he finally said. "Maybe it only appears at night." The next night, they returned with Harry's invisibility cloak. This time, the door was there. Harry's heart raced as he turned the handle, hoping the mirror hadn't disappeared as mysteriously as the room had. To his relief, the mirror stood exactly where he'd left it, its golden frame gleaming in the moonlight streaming through the window. "Whoa," Ron breathed as they pulled off the cloak. "It looks a bit like the Mirror of Erised." "But the inscription is different," Hermione noted, stepping closer to examine the ornate lettering across the top. "Ostendo quid veniet, non quid cupis." "Let me think," that roughly translates to, "I show what will come, not what you desire." "That's exactly what it does," Harry said, approaching the mirror cautiously. "It shows the future instead of desires." Ron moved to stand before the mirror, his face lighting up with excitement. "I see us in the Quidditch final. I'm saving a goal from the Slytherin chaser." Harry joined him. "I see that too now." Hermione hung back, her expression troubled. "Harry, if this mirror really shows the future, we need to understand how it works before using it. Is it showing a fixed future or just possibilities? Can the future it shows be changed? There are serious ethical questions here." "Come on, Hermione," Ron said. "Think about what this could mean for fighting you-know-who. We could see his plans before he carries them out." "That's exactly what worries me," Hermione replied. "Tampering with time and foreknowledge has consequences. What if seeing the future changes it in ways we don't intend?" Harry stared into the mirror, watching scenes shift and change. "I understand your concerns, Hermione, but this could save lives. If I can see an attack coming, I could prevent it." Hermione sighed, finally stepping forward to look into the mirror herself. Her eyes widened slightly at whatever she saw, but she didn't share it with the boys. "We should research this," she said after a moment. "Find out where this mirror came from, who made it, how it works. Knowledge is power, but only if we understand it." "Library tomorrow?" Harry suggested, knowing it was the best way to get Hermione on board. She nodded, still looking troubled. "And Harry?" "Until we know more, maybe we shouldn't make any significant changes based on what we see. Small things might be okay, but anything major." "I get it," Harry assured her. "Just observation for now." But as they left the room, Harry couldn't help but think about all the possibilities this mirror opened up. For once, he might be able to stay a step ahead of Voldemort instead of always reacting to attacks after they happened. The thought was too tempting to ignore. The next few days passed in a blur of classes, homework, and secret trips to what they now called the Mirror Room. Harry found himself increasingly drawn to the mirror, checking it for glimpses of coming events both trivial and significant. The mirror had shown him that Umbridge would be inspecting Professor Flitwick's class on Thursday, allowing him to warn the charms professor discreetly. Flitwick had been so well prepared that even Umbridge couldn't find fault with his teaching methods. It had also revealed that Katie Bell would suffer a minor injury during Quidditch practice on Wednesday, which Harry prevented by suggesting a slight change to their training routine. These small interventions bolstered his confidence in the mirror's accuracy and in his ability to subtly change outcomes for the better. Meanwhile, Hermione had been practically living in the library, researching magical mirrors and divination artifacts. So far, she'd found nothing specific about a mirror of destiny, though she had uncovered several references to experimental time-related enchantments from the 16th century. It was during breakfast on Friday that Harry first noticed the new defense against the dark arts professor watching him with unusual intensity. Professor Cronius had arrived 2 weeks into the term after Umbridge's demotion to Hogwarts High Inquisitor only. The Ministry had insisted on keeping her at Hogwarts, but Dumbledore had somehow managed to bring in Cronius to take over actual data teaching duties. The professor was a tall, lean man with silver-streaked black hair and penetrating gray eyes that seemed to see right through you. Unlike the previous data teachers, Cronius kept to himself, rarely speaking at meals and appearing almost mysteriously in corridors when least expected. His classes were challenging but practical, focusing on defensive magic that even Hermione admitted was useful. "He's staring again," Ron muttered, poking at his eggs. "Reckon he knows something?" Harry shrugged, trying to appear unconcerned. "How could he? We've been careful." "Harry's right," Hermione said, though she didn't sound entirely convinced. "We've only gone to the mirror room after curfew, and we've always used the invisibility cloak." "There's something off about him though," Harry admitted. "Yesterday he asked me if I'd found anything illuminating in the castle recently." His exact word, illuminating. Hermione frowned. "That is strange. But he could have been referring to anything." "Maybe," Harry agreed, but he couldn't shake the feeling that Professor Cronius knew more than he was letting on. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of the morning mail. As predicted by the mirror the night before, a school owl dropped a letter in front of Harry. The handwriting on the envelope was unfamiliar, and there was no return address. Harry opened it cautiously, half expecting it to be some kind of prank or worse. Inside was a single line of text: "Not all reflections show the truth. Some futures should remain unseen." Harry's blood ran cold. He quickly showed the note to Ron and Hermione. "Who would send this?" Ron asked, looking around the great hall suspiciously. Hermione took the note, examining it closely. "It could be coincidence. Maybe it's not about the mirror at all." "Right," Harry said sarcastically. "Someone just randomly decided to send me a cryptic warning about reflections and futures." "We should be more careful," Hermione decided, pocketing the note. "And maybe we should tell Dumbledore about the mirror." Harry shook his head firmly. "Not yet. The headmaster has barely looked at me all year. Besides, what if he decides to move the mirror like he did with the Mirror of Erised? This could be our best chance against Voldemort." "Harry," Hermione began, but was cut off by the bell signaling the start of classes. "We'll talk later," Harry promised as they gathered their things. As they left the Great Hall, Harry couldn't resist glancing back at the staff table. Professor Cronius was still watching him, a knowing smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Defense against the dark arts that afternoon was more intense than usual. Professor Cronius had them practicing shield charms against increasingly powerful hexes. "In a real fight," he explained as he paced the classroom, "your opponent won't politely wait for you to prepare your defenses. You must react instantly, instinctively." He stopped in front of Harry. "Mr. Potter, perhaps you'd be willing to demonstrate? I understand you have considerable experience with defensive magic." Harry stepped forward, wand at the ready. He'd been teaching shield charms to the DA for weeks now, so he felt reasonably confident. "Prepared?" Cronius asked, raising his own wand. Harry nodded, but before he could even think about the proper incantation, Cronius had fired off a spell, non-verbally and with barely a flick of his wand. "Protego!" Harry shouted, bringing up his shield just in time. The force of the professor's spell still pushed him back several feet, but his shield held. "Very good," Cronius said, looking genuinely impressed. "You have quick reflexes, Mr. Potter. Almost as if you knew what was coming." There was something in the way he emphasized those last words that made Harry's skin prickle. Just good instincts, sir, Harry replied carefully. Indeed. Cronius smiled that same knowing smile from breakfast. Instincts are valuable, but foreknowledge is power. Wouldn't you agree? Before Harry could respond, Cronius turned to address the entire class. That will be all for today. For homework, practice your nonverbal shield charms. Mr. Potter, a word after class, please. Harry exchanged worried glances with Ron and Hermione as the rest of the students packed up and filed out. Hermione mouthed, "We'll wait outside," as she reluctantly left with Ron. Once the classroom was empty, Cronius gestured for Harry to sit. "Am I in trouble, Professor?" Harry asked, trying to sound casual. "That depends," Cronius replied, leaning against his desk. Trouble has a way of finding those who meddle with forces beyond their understanding. Harry's heart began to race, but he kept his expression neutral. "I'm not sure what you mean, sir." "No." Cronius raised an eyebrow. "Then let me be direct. You've been making some interesting choices lately, Mr. Potter. Preventative choices, one might say. Warning Professor Flitwick about an inspection. Changing Quidditch practice to avoid an accident. Small things, but noticeable to those who pay attention." Harry swallowed hard. "Just lucky guesses, Professor." "I see." Cronius studied him for a moment. "Tell me, what do you know about the consequences of changing fate?" "Sir. When you alter what was meant to be, even with the best intentions, the universe has a way of balancing the scales," Cronius explained, his tone suddenly serious. "Prevent one accident, another may occur. Save one person, another might suffer. The future is delicate, Mr. Potter. It doesn't appreciate being manipulated." Harry felt a chill run down his spine. "Are you saying I shouldn't try to prevent bad things from happening?" "I'm saying you should be extremely careful about how and when you intervene," Cronius clarified. "Especially if your information comes from a source that might not show the complete picture." There was no doubt now, Cronius knew about the mirror. But how? And why was he warning Harry rather than confiscating it or reporting him to Dumbledore? "I don't mean to be rude, Professor," Harry said carefully, "but why are you telling me this?" Cronius smiled again, but this time it seemed sad rather than knowing. "Let's just say I have some experience with the burden of foreknowledge. It's a heavier weight than most realize until it's too late." He straightened up and moved toward his office door. "That's all for now, Mr. Potter. But remember what I said. And perhaps consider sharing your discoveries with those who might help you bear that burden wisely." Harry stood, his mind racing with questions he didn't dare ask. "Yes, Professor. Thank you." As he left the classroom to rejoin Ron and Hermione, Harry couldn't shake the feeling that Professor Cronius was more than just a defense teacher. The question was he an ally or another threat? "He knows," Harry said as soon as they were safely away from the classroom. "Cronius definitely knows about the mirror." Hermione looked worried. "Did he say how?" "No, but he warned me about changing the future. Said it could have consequences I'm not prepared for." Ron frowned. "Do you think he's the one who sent that note at breakfast?" "Maybe," Harry admitted. "But he didn't seem threatening, more like, concerned." "This is exactly why we should tell Dumbledore," Hermione insisted. "If Professor Cronius knows, others might too. Including people who might want to use the mirror for less noble purposes." Harry nodded reluctantly. "You're right. But let me check the mirror one more time tonight. There's something specific I want to look for." "What?" Ron asked. "The next Hogsmeade weekend is tomorrow. I want to see if anything happens, anything bad." Hermione looked ready to argue but then sighed in resignation. "Fine. One more time. But then we talk to Dumbledore." That night, the three of them slipped into the mirror room under the invisibility cloak. Harry approached the mirror with purpose, focusing his thoughts on the upcoming Hogsmeade visit. The surface of the mirror rippled like disturbed water before settling into a clear image. What Harry saw made his blood run cold. In the reflection, chaos reigned in the village of Hogsmeade. Masked Death Eaters operated into the main street, firing curses indiscriminately. Students screamed and ran for cover. A building, the Three Broomsticks, was engulfed in flames. And in the center of it all stood a figure that made Harry's scar burn just looking at him, Lord Voldemort. "What do you see?" Ron asked, unable to see the mirror's reflection from his angle. "An attack," Harry said, his voice hollow. "Death Eaters in Hogsmeade. Tomorrow." Hermione gasped. "Are you sure?" "Positive. Voldemort will be there too." Ron paled. "We have to warn someone." "Dumbledore, and tell him what?" Harry interrupted. "That I saw it in a magical mirror no one's supposed to know about. That I've been using it to see the future for weeks." "Yes, exactly that," Hermione said firmly. "Harry, this is bigger than getting in trouble for being out after curfew. People could die." Harry ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "You're right. But what if he doesn't believe us? Or what if by warning him, we somehow make things worse? Worse than a Death Eater attack on Hogsmeade?" Ron asked incredulously. "Remember what Professor Cronius said," Harry reminded them. "Changing fate has consequences." Hermione put a hand on his arm. "So does doing nothing when you could have prevented something terrible. You've already made changes based on what you've seen in the mirror, Harry. Small ones, yes, but changes nonetheless." "This is different," Harry argued. "This is Voldemort." "All the more reason to tell Dumbledore," Hermione countered. Harry stared into the mirror again, watching the horrific scene play out. Students running in terror, Death Eaters laughing as they cast curses, Voldemort's snake-like face twisted in cruel satisfaction. And then he saw something that made his decision for him. In the chaos, a jet of green light struck Ginny Weasley in the back as she tried to help a younger student to safety. "We're telling Dumbledore," Harry said firmly, turning away from the mirror. Now. Getting to the headmaster's office at nearly midnight wasn't easy, even with the invisibility cloak and Marauder's map. They narrowly avoided both Filch and Mrs. Norris before finally arriving at the stone gargoyle guarding the entrance. "Air, chocolate frogs. Fizzing whizbees. Lemon drops." Harry tried, but the gargoyle remained still. "Dumbledore always uses sweets as his password," he explained to Ron and Hermione. "Sugar quills. Bertie Bott's. Acid pops." At the last one, the gargoyle sprang aside, revealing the spiral staircase behind it. "Nice one," Ron said as they stepped onto the moving stairs. Harry knocked on the heavy wooden door at the top, half expecting no answer at this hour. To his surprise, Dumbledore's calm voice immediately responded, "Enter." The headmaster was seated behind his desk as if he'd been expecting them, despite the late hour. His half-moon spectacles gleamed in the candlelight as he looked up from a thick, ancient-looking book. "Ah, Harry, Mr. Weasley, Miss Granger. A bit late for a social call, I think. This must be important." Harry stepped forward. "It is, Professor. There's going to be an attack on Hogsmeade tomorrow. Voldemort and his Death Eaters." Dumbledore's expression remained calm, but his blue eyes sharpened with interest. "That is indeed serious information. May I ask how you came by this knowledge?" Harry hesitated, then decided honesty was the only option. "I found a mirror, sir. Not the mirror of Eriste, but something similar. It shows the future instead of desires." For the first time in Harry's memory, Dumbledore looked genuinely surprised. "The Mirror of Destiny? Here at Hogwarts? You know about it?" Hermione asked. "I had heard rumors," Dumbledore replied, standing slowly. "It was believed lost centuries ago." "Where did you find it?" Harry described the room and how he'd stumbled upon it while hiding from Filch. Dumbledore listened intently, asking a few clarifying questions about the mirror's appearance and the inscription. "And you're certain about what you saw?" he asked when Harry described the attack. "Lord Voldemort himself in Hogsmeade?" "Yes, sir." It was clear. "The attack happens tomorrow during the Hogsmeade visit." Dumbledore walked to the window, gazing out at the dark grounds below. "This is troubling news indeed. If the mirror is genuine, and I believe it is, then we must take this threat seriously." He turned back to face them. "I will alert the Order immediately. The Hogsmeade visit will proceed as planned to avoid raising suspicions, but we will have Order members positioned throughout the village, ready to respond at the first sign of trouble." "So you believe me?" Harry asked, somewhat surprised by Dumbledore's ready acceptance. "I do," Dumbledore replied simply. "The Mirror of Destiny is a powerful artifact with a complicated history. Its visions are generally accurate, though the future it shows is not always fixed." "That's what Professor Cronius said," Harry blurted out before he could stop himself. "About the future not being fixed, I mean." Dumbledore's eyebrows rose slightly. "Professor Cronius mentioned the mirror to you?" "Not exactly," Harry admitted. "But he seemed to know I'd been using something to see the future. He warned me about changing things." "A wise warning," Dumbledore nodded. "Artemis Cronius is well versed in matters of time and prophecy. It does not surprise me that he noticed your recent foreknowledge." Hermione stepped forward. "Professor, what exactly is the Mirror of Destiny? I couldn't find any information about it in the library." "You wouldn't," Dumbledore replied with a small smile. "Its existence has been deliberately obscured from most historical records due to its dangerous potential. It was created by Cassandra Trelawney, a genuine seer and ancestor of our own Professor Trelawney, in collaboration with a wizard chronologist named Elias Tempest." "What makes it dangerous?" Ron asked nervously. "Knowledge of the future is always dangerous, Mr. Weasley," Dumbledore said gravely. "It can lead to obsession, to attempts to manipulate events that are better left to unfold naturally. And as you've already learned, changing what is foreseen can have unexpected consequences. But in this case, changing the future means saving lives," Harry argued. "Indeed," Dumbledore agreed. "Which is why we will act on your warning. But afterward, I must ask that you show me to this mirror. It is not something that should remain accessible, particularly in these troubled times." Harry felt a surge of disappointment but nodded in agreement. "Yes, sir." "Now," Dumbledore continued, "you three should return to your dormitory and get some rest. Tomorrow may well be a difficult day. And Harry, it would be best if you remained in the castle during the Hogsmeade visit." "What?" "But sir, the future you saw showed Voldemort in Hogsmeade. If he is indeed planning to appear personally, it is almost certainly with the hope of encountering you. Let us not give him that opportunity." Harry wanted to protest but knew Dumbledore was right. If Voldemort was specifically coming for him, staying away from Hogsmeade was the smart move. "Fine," he conceded. "But Ron and Hermione should stay too." His friends nodded in agreement. "A wise decision," Dumbledore said approvingly. "Now, off to bed with you all. And Harry, thank you for bringing this to my attention, despite your understandable reservations." As they left the office, Harry couldn't help feeling that while one crisis might have been averted, another was just beginning. What other futures did the mirror have to show him before Dumbledore took it away? The next morning dawned bright and clear, a perfect day for a trip to Hogsmeade. Harry watched from a window in Gryffindor Tower as excited students gathered in the courtyard, completely unaware of the danger that might be waiting for them. Professor McGonagall was checking permission forms with her usual efficiency, while Filch scowled at everyone who passed. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, except for the casual presence of several Order members Harry recognized. Tonks was disguised as a street vendor near the gates, while Kingsley Shacklebolt and Remus Lupin chatted with Professor Flitwick as if they just happened to visit on this particular day. "Dumbledore's not taking any chances," Ron observed, standing beside Harry at the window. Good, Harry replied grimly. I just hope it's enough. Hermione joined them, clutching a thick book. I've been researching temporal magic since dawn. There's not much specifically on the Mirror of Destiny, but there are some references to artifacts that show possible futures rather than fixed ones. So what we saw might not happen exactly that way? Ron asked hopefully. It's complicated, Hermione explained. According to this, the future exists as a web of possibilities, with some paths more likely than others. What the mirror shows is the most probable future at that moment, but our knowledge of it automatically changes the probabilities. Harry frowned. So by warning Dumbledore. We've already altered the future the mirror showed you, Hermione confirmed. The Death Eaters might still attack, but they'll be walking into a trap rather than finding unprepared students. Harry nodded, feeling slightly better about their decision to intervene. Still, he couldn't shake the lingering worry that they might have somehow made things worse. The hours passed slowly. Harry, Ron, and Hermione tried to distract themselves with homework, but Harry kept checking the Marauders' map, watching the dots representing their friends and classmates move around Hogsmeade. They should be at the Three Broomsticks by now, he noted, seeing the cluster of dots labeled with familiar names. That's where the attack started in my vision. Ron and Hermione peered over his shoulder at the map. Everything seemed normal, no sudden movements, no new dots appearing out of nowhere as would happen if Death Eaters operate in. And then, just as Harry was beginning to think the mirror had been wrong, it happened. New dots appeared on the map in the center of Hogsmeade, labeled with names that made Harry's blood run cold: Dolohov, Malfoy, Lestrange, and others he recognized from the Department of Mysteries. They're here, he whispered, his finger trembling as he pointed to the new arrivals. The Death Eaters are in Hogsmeade. But something was different from his vision. The Order members were moving quickly, surrounding the Death Eaters before they could disperse. The dots representing students were moving away from the danger, herded to safety by teachers. Most importantly, there was no dot labeled Tom Riddle or Lord Voldemort anywhere on the map. It's working, Hermione said, her voice tight with tension. Dumbledore's plan is working. They watched in silent anxiety as the dots moved in what could only be a fierce battle. Occasionally, a dot would remain still for too long, making Harry's stomach clench with fear for whoever it represented. After what seemed like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, the battle appeared to be winding down. Most of the Death Eater dots had either disappeared, escaped by apparition, Harry assumed, or remained stationary, stunned or captured. We should go to the hospital wing, Harry decided, rolling up the map. That's where they'll bring anyone who's hurt. They raced through the castle corridors, passing confused-looking students who hadn't gone to Hogsmeade and therefore had no idea what was happening. The hospital wing was already bustling with activity when they arrived. Madame Pomfrey moved efficiently from bed to bed, treating injuries with practiced skill. Several Order members sat on beds with minor wounds, while Professor McGonagall coordinated with other teachers. Harry scanned the room frantically for familiar faces, relaxing slightly when he spotted Ginny helping Luna Lovegood with a bandage on her arm. Both girls were alive and mostly unharmed, contrary to his vision. Potter, Weasley, Granger, McGonagall called when she noticed them. What are you doing here? We heard about the attack, Harry said quickly. Is everyone okay? McGonagall's stern expression softened slightly. Thanks to your warning, we were prepared. There were injuries, but nothing life-threatening, and no casualties among our students. Several Death Eaters were captured as well. And Voldemort? Harry asked. He never appeared, McGonagall replied. It seems his forces expected an easy target and retreated when they met organized resistance. Harry felt a wave of relief wash over him. They had changed the future the mirror had shown, and for the better. People who would have died were alive. The Three Broomsticks was intact, not engulfed in flames. Voldemort had been thwarted without Harry even being there. Professor Dumbledore would like to see you in his office once things settle down here, McGonagall added. In the meantime, you may stay if you wish to check on your friends, but try not to get in Madame Pomfrey's way." They nodded gratefully and moved to where Ginny and Luna were sitting. "Harry!" Ginny exclaimed when she saw them. "You three missed all the excitement. What happened?" Ron asked, trying to sound as if he didn't already know. "Death Eaters appeared right in the middle of the village," Ginny explained, her eyes wide with residual adrenaline. "But the order was there too, somehow. It was like they knew the attack was coming." "How did you get hurt?" Hermione asked Luna, gesturing to her bandaged arm. "Oh, this?" Luna looked down at her arm dreamily. "A stray cutting hex. It's not bad. Ginny pulled me out of the way before it could do much damage." Harry's gaze snapped to Ginny. In his vision, she had died trying to help a younger student. In reality, she had saved Luna and survived. "Good reflexes," he said, his voice slightly unsteady. Ginny grinned. "All that Quidditch practice pays off." They spent the next hour helping where they could and checking on other friends. Neville had a nasty bruise on his forehead but was proudly telling anyone who would listen how he'd managed to stun a Death Eater before being hit. Fred and George, who had been visiting their Hogsmeade shop branch, had apparently turned the battle into an opportunity to test some of their more defensive products, including decoy detonators and Peruvian instant darkness powder. By late afternoon, the hospital wing had quieted down. Most students with minor injuries had been treated and released, while the more seriously wounded Order members had been transferred to St. Mungo's. "Time to see Dumbledore," Harry said to Ron and Hermione as Madame Pomfrey shooed the last of the visitors out. They made their way to the headmaster's office, finding the gargoyle already stepped aside as if expecting them. Dumbledore was waiting behind his desk, looking tired but satisfied. "Ah, there you are," he greeted them. "I trust you've seen for yourselves that the situation in Hogsmeade has been resolved." "Yes, sir," Harry replied. Professor McGonagall said no students were seriously hurt. "Indeed. We were fortunate, or rather, we were forewarned, thanks to you." Dumbledore's blue eyes twinkled briefly. "The future you saw in the mirror did not come to pass exactly as you witnessed it. This is both the power and the limitation of foreknowledge." "Voldemort didn't show up," Harry noted. "No," Dumbledore agreed. "I suspect he was waiting to see if his Death Eaters could secure the village before risking his own appearance. When they encountered unexpected resistance, he chose to remain hidden." "So the mirror was wrong?" Ron asked. "Not wrong," Dumbledore corrected gently. "It showed a future that would have occurred had events proceeded without our intervention. By changing our actions based on that knowledge, we created a new future." Hermione nodded in understanding. "It's like a feedback loop. The mirror shows what will happen if we don't know what will happen." "Precisely, Miss Granger," Dumbledore smiled approvingly. "Which is why such artifacts are both powerful and dangerous. Now, I believe you agreed to show me to this mirror." Harry hesitated, suddenly reluctant to give up access to the mirror. What other threats could he prevent with its help? What advantages could it give them in the fight against Voldemort? But he remembered Professor Cronius's warning about the burden of foreknowledge, and the mysterious note he'd received. Not all reflections show the truth. Some futures should remain unseen. "Yes, sir," he finally agreed. "I'll take you there now." The mirror room was exactly as they'd left it the night before. Dumbledore approached the artifact reverently, running his fingers along the golden frame. "Remarkable," he murmured. "I never thought to see it in person." "What will you do with it?" Harry asked, unable to keep the concern from his voice. Dumbledore turned to face him, his expression serious. "It cannot remain accessible, Harry. The temptation to rely on it would be too great, even for the strongest among us. But it helped us today. Lives were saved because of what I saw." "Yes," Dumbledore acknowledged. "And I do not discount that. But consider, what might happen if Voldemort learned of its existence? What if he found a way to access it, to see the outcomes of his plans before executing them? Or what if you became so dependent on its guidance that you lost the ability to trust your own instincts? Harry wanted to argue but found he couldn't. The mirror had shown him Voldemort in Hogsmeade, yet the Dark Lord never appeared. What else might it show that wouldn't come to pass exactly as seen? Or worse, what might happen if he tried to prevent too many foreseen events, upsetting the balance Professor Cronius had warned about? I understand, he said reluctantly. But where will you take it? Somewhere safe, Dumbledore replied cryptically. Not destroyed, but protected. Knowledge of the future is a complex magic, Harry. It's neither wholly good nor wholly evil, it simply is. How we use that knowledge determines its value and its danger. With a wave of his wand, Dumbledore conjured a large cloth that wrapped itself around the mirror, concealing its reflective surface. Before I remove it, however, there is something you should know, Dumbledore continued. The Mirror of Destiny does not simply show random futures. It tends to reveal events that the viewer has the power to influence, directly or indirectly. The fact that it showed you Voldemort's attack suggests you have a significant role to play in the coming conflict. The prophecy, Harry said quietly. Indeed. But remember, Harry, prophecies, like mirror visions, show possibilities, not certainties. Our choices still matter. They still shape our fate, even when that fate seems predetermined. Dumbledore cast a levitation charm on the covered mirror, which rose a few inches off the ground. Sir, Harry began hesitantly, before you take it away, could I look one more time? There's something specific I want to know. Dumbledore studied him thoughtfully before nodding. One last look, Harry. Choose your question carefully. Harry stepped forward as Dumbledore removed the cloth. Standing before the mirror, he focused his thoughts on the question that had been haunting him since he first learned of the prophecy: would he defeat Voldemort? Or would Voldemort kill him? The mirror's surface rippled, then cleared to show a scene that made Harry's breath catch. He saw himself, older by several years, standing in what appeared to be the Great Hall of Hogwarts. Across from him stood Voldemort, their wands connected by a beam of golden light. Around them, friends and enemies alike watched in suspended animation as if time itself had slowed. And then, with a brilliant flash, the connection broke. Voldemort fell backward, his wand flying from his hand, his body crumpling to the floor, lifeless. Harry stepped back from the mirror, his heart pounding. I saw. He glanced at Ron and Hermione, then at Dumbledore. I saw the end. And? Dumbledore prompted gently. I win, Harry said, a new determination filling him. Somehow, someday, I win. Dumbledore smiled, his eyes twinkling behind his half-moon spectacles. Then perhaps the mirror has served its purpose after all. He covered the Mirror of Destiny once more and levitated it toward the door. The future is never certain, Harry, even when glimpsed through magical means. But hope is a power that even the darkest magic cannot fully extinguish. As they watched Dumbledore guide the covered mirror out of the room, Harry felt a curious mixture of loss and relief. The mirror had shown him both terrible and wonderful possibilities. It had saved lives today, and it had given him a vision of ultimate victory against Voldemort. Whether that particular future would come to pass exactly as he'd seen it, Harry couldn't know. But the mirror had given him something perhaps more valuable than foreknowledge, confidence that such a future was possible. What now? Ron asked as they made their way back to Gryffindor Tower. Harry thought about everything that had happened since he'd discovered the mirror. The small changes he'd made, the attack they'd prevented, and the final vision of Voldemort's defeat. Now, he said with determination, we make our own future. As they turned a corner, they nearly collided with Professor Cronius, who seemed to appear out of nowhere. Ah, Mr. Potter, he said with that same knowing smile. Finding your way forward, I see. Yes, Professor, Harry replied. Without mirrors. Cronius nodded approvingly. The clearest view of the future often comes from looking straight ahead rather than at reflections. Remember that. As the professor continued down the corridor, Harry couldn't shake the feeling that Cronius knew far more than he was letting on. But that was a mystery for another day. For now, Harry was content to let the future unfold naturally, one moment at a time. Later that night, as Harry lay in his four-poster bed listening to Ron's gentle snoring, he found himself thinking about the last vision the mirror had shown him. The details were already growing fuzzy, but the outcome remained clear in his mind: Voldemort defeated, by his hand. He knew it wouldn't be easy or straightforward. The path to that moment would likely be filled with challenges and sacrifices he couldn't yet imagine. But for the first time since learning about the prophecy, Harry felt a genuine sense of hope. The mirror might be gone, but its most important lesson remained: the future wasn't fixed. It could be changed, shaped, improved through their actions in the present. As he drifted off to sleep, Harry's last thought was not of magical mirrors or prophecies or predestined fates, but of the choices he would make tomorrow. Because ultimately, those were what would truly determine his future, not reflections of what might be, but actions in the here and now. In his dreams, Harry stood once more before an empty frame where a mirror had once been, and somehow, that seemed exactly right. Chapter 2, Fractured Futures. Harry jolted awake, his heart hammering against his ribs. The dream had been so vivid, Voldemort torturing Sirius in the Department of Mysteries, just like the vision that had lured him there last year. Except this time, Harry knew it wasn't real. Sirius was gone, and this was just his mind replaying old fears with new twists. He fumbled for his glasses and checked his watch. 4:27 a.m. Too early to get up, too late to hope for much more sleep. The dormitory was quiet except for Neville's soft snoring and Ron's occasional mumble. Harry flopped back onto his pillow, staring at the canopy of his four-poster bed. It had been 3 weeks since Dumbledore had removed the Mirror of Destiny from Hogwarts, and Harry couldn't stop thinking about it. The Hogsmeade attack had been thwarted with no casualties, proving the Mirror's visions could save lives. But his final glimpse, that moment of ultimate victory against Voldemort, tugged at his thoughts constantly. How would it happen? When? And most importantly, what steps should he take now to ensure that future came to pass? Without the mirror to guide him, Harry felt like he was stumbling blind again. Every decision seemed heavier, every choice a potential wrong turn from the path to victory he'd glimpsed. He sighed and slipped out of bed. Sleep wasn't coming back tonight. The common room was deserted at this hour, the fire reduced to glowing embers that cast long shadows across the worn furniture. Harry curled up in his favorite armchair, summoning one of the textbooks he'd left on a nearby table. Advanced Defense Against the Dark Arts, he muttered, flipping through Professor Cronius' assigned reading. The man was a demanding teacher, but Harry had to admit he was learning more practical defense skills than ever before, except perhaps with the DA. Speaking of which, Harry glanced at his watch again. He'd promised the DA members they'd resume meetings this week after the post-Hogsmeade hiatus. They were eager to hear about the attack and to learn new spells that might help in similar situations. But what should he teach them without foreknowledge of what was coming? A noise from the staircase made him look up. Hermione appeared, already dressed despite the early hour, a heavy book tucked under her arm. Couldn't sleep either? She asked, settling into the chair opposite him. Bad dreams, Harry admitted. You. Too much to research. She patted the ancient tome she'd brought down. I've been going through historical references to prophetic objects. Professor Cronius gave me special permission to access the restricted section. Harry raised his eyebrows. Find anything about our mirror? Bits and pieces. She opened the book to a marked page. Most direct references to the Mirror of Destiny have been removed from Hogwarts Library, just as Dumbledore said. But there are oblique mentions in other texts. Like what? Hermione leaned forward eagerly. Well, there's this account from 1742 of a wizard who claimed to have glimpsed the threads of fate through a looking glass of futures. He tried to prevent his wife's death, but every action he took seemed to accelerate the timeline instead. Harry frowned. That doesn't sound encouraging. No, Hermione agreed. Most of the references follow a similar pattern. Someone sees a future event, tries to prevent it, and either causes it to happen or creates an even worse outcome. But we prevented the Hogsmeade attack, Harry pointed out. Nobody died. True, but that was a fairly straightforward intervention with Dumbledore's help. My point is, she hesitated, choosing her words carefully. The mirror might not always be reliable, especially for more complex events with multiple decision points. Harry nodded slowly, remembering what both Dumbledore and Professor Cronius had said about the consequences of changing fate. I get what you're saying. But it doesn't matter anyway since Dumbledore took the mirror. Hermione gave him a searching look. You miss it, don't you? Wouldn't you? Harry asked. Having that kind of advantage against Voldemort? Knowing what he's planning before he does it? I'd be terrified of making things worse, Hermione said quietly. Every choice would feel impossible. What if preventing one tragedy causes 3 more? How would you live with that? Before Harry could respond, more footsteps sounded on the stairs. Ron appeared, bleary-eyed and yawning. Why were you two up so early? He mumbled, dropping into a nearby chair. Couldn't sleep, Harry and Hermione said in unison. Ron squinted at them suspiciously. Were you talking about the mirror again? Just a bit, Harry admitted. Mate, you've got to let it go, Ron said with surprising firmness. It's been weeks. The mirror's gone, and good riddance if you ask me. Harry blinked, caught off guard by Ron's tone. Good riddance. You were all for using it when we first found it. Yeah, well, that was before I thought about it properly. Ron scrubbed a hand through his hair, making it stand up in tufts almost as messy as Harry's. Look what it did to you in just a few days. You were obsessed, checking it for everything from Quidditch outcomes to what Snape would ask in potions. I wasn't obsessed, Harry protested, though a small voice in the back of his mind whispered that Ron might not be entirely wrong. You kind of were, Hermione said gently. And Ron's right, it's probably better this way. We can focus on things we can control, like the DA and studying for newts. Harry bit back a sharp retort. His friends meant well, but they didn't understand. They hadn't seen what he'd seen in that final vision, the moment of victory, the end of Voldemort. How could he not want guidance on how to reach that outcome? Fine, he said instead. You're right. I'll stop bringing it up. Ron and Hermione exchanged a look that plainly said they didn't believe him, but they let the subject drop. As the conversation turned to the upcoming DA meeting and Quidditch practice, Harry found his thoughts drifting back to the mirror nonetheless. If only he could see it one more time. Professor Cronius paced the front of the classroom, his silver-streaked black hair gleaming in the morning sunlight streaming through the windows. The entire class watched him with rapt attention, even the Slytherins, who normally made a point of appearing bored in defense against the dark arts. Time, he said, is neither fixed nor fluid. It exists in a state of perpetual potential, constrained by choices already made but malleable through choices yet to come. He flicked his wand, and an intricate web of golden threads appeared in the air above the students' heads, connecting and branching in complex patterns. Imagine each thread as a possible future, Cronius continued. Each decision we make eliminates some threads and reinforces others. The future is constantly being woven by our present actions. Harry found himself entranced by the glowing display. It reminded him of how Dumbledore had described the Mirror of Destiny, showing the most probable future at any given moment, but one that could change based on their knowledge and actions. Now, Cronius said, waving his wand again so the web vanished, how does this relate to defensive magic? Simply this, anticipation is your greatest weapon. Reading your opponent's intentions, predicting their next move, positioning yourself advantageously for what comes next, these skills separate the truly great duelists from the merely competent. He pointed to Harry. Mr. Potter, your reputation suggests you have good instincts in this area. Care to demonstrate? Harry stood somewhat reluctantly. Since their private conversation about the mirror, he'd felt Cronius watching him even more closely than before. "Certainly, Professor." "Excellent. The rest of you, clear a space." Students scrambled to push desks against the walls, creating an open area for the demonstration. Harry moved to the center, wand held loosely at his side as Cronius took position opposite him. "I will cast a series of jinxes," Cronius explained. "Mr. Potter will attempt to predict and counter them based on my movements and positioning rather than waiting to see the spell itself. No shield charms allowed, specific counter jinxes only." Harry nodded, focusing intently on Cronius' stance. This was something he'd actually practiced with the DA, reading an opponent's body language to anticipate their attack. Cronius moved suddenly, his wand arm rising toward Harry's left side. Harry pivoted, already casting the counter jinx to a leglock or curse before Cronius' spell was fully formed. The professor smiled approvingly. "Well anticipated, Mr. Potter." Again. They continued this strange dance for several minutes, with Cronius throwing increasingly subtle feints and misdirections into his movements. Harry managed to counter most successfully, though a few caught him off guard, leaving him briefly hopping on one foot or speaking in a squeaky voice until Cronius reversed the effects. "Very good," Cronius said finally. "What you've just witnessed is a form of divination, not the cloudy crystal ball variety, but practical prediction based on observable cues and patterns." He turned to address the entire class. "This skill can be developed without special abilities or magical artifacts. It requires only attention, practice, and a willingness to act decisively on incomplete information." His eyes lingered on Harry for a moment, and Harry couldn't shake the feeling that this entire lesson had been designed specifically for him, a pointed reminder that he didn't need the Mirror of Destiny to prepare for what was coming. As they packed up at the end of class, Cronius called out, "Mr. Potter, a word before you go." Harry nodded to Ron and Hermione to go ahead without him, then approached the professor's desk. "You wanted to see me, sir." Cronius waited until the last student had left before speaking. "You're still thinking about it, aren't you? The mirror." Harry considered denying it but decided honesty was probably the better approach with Cronius. "Yes, sir. It's hard not to." "I understand." Cronius leaned against his desk, studying Harry with those piercing gray eyes. "The allure of foreknowledge is powerful. Even those who understand its dangers can be tempted." "It helped us stop the Hogsmeade attack," Harry pointed out. "It did," Cronius acknowledged. "But consider this, what if the attack was merely a prelude? What if preventing it has set in motion other events, perhaps worse ones, that you cannot see?" Harry frowned. "You think stopping the attack was a mistake?" "Not at all. I'm merely illustrating the complexity of temporal causality." Cronius straightened up and moved to a cabinet behind his desk. "I have something for you, Harry. A tool that may help you develop your natural abilities without the crutch of prophetic artifacts." He withdrew a small silver object that resembled a sneakoscope but with multiple spinning rings around its central axis. "This is a probability compass," Cronius explained, handing it to Harry. "Unlike divination tools that attempt to show fixed futures, this device responds to the currents of possibility surrounding its user. It can help you sense when multiple paths are converging on a critical decision point." Harry turned the delicate instrument in his hands. The rings spun independently, occasionally aligning to form patterns before separating again. "How does it work?" "With practice, you'll learn to interpret its movements," Cronius said. "When the rings align in a stable pattern, it indicates a moment of heightened significance, a nexus point where your choices may have far-reaching consequences." "And you're just giving this to me?" Harry asked skeptically. Cronius smiled. "Let's call it a loan. I believe you have the potential to use it wisely." Harry pocketed the probability compass, not entirely sure what to make of the gift but grateful nonetheless. "Thank you, Professor. I'll try to live up to that belief." As he turned to leave, Cronius added, "One more thing, Harry. Remember that sometimes the best preparation for the future is simply becoming the person who can handle whatever it brings, not knowing what's coming in advance. Harry nodded, feeling both encouraged and chastised by the professor's words. As he left the classroom, he couldn't help wondering whether Cronius was trying to help him move beyond the mirror or preparing him for something else entirely. The room of requirement had outdone itself for the first DA meeting of the new term. The space was larger than before, with padded training dummies arranged in a circle, bookshelves filled with defensive texts, and a large clear area in the center for demonstrations. "Blimey," Ron whistled as they entered. "Looks like the room knows we mean business this year." Nearly 30 students had shown up, more than Harry had expected. Word of how the DA members had fought back during the Hogsmeade attack had spread through the school, bringing new recruits eager to learn practical defense. "Right," Harry said once everyone had arrived. "Welcome back, and welcome to those joining us for the first time. After what happened in Hogsmeade, I thought we should focus on spells for chaotic situations, how to protect yourself and others when surrounded by multiple threats." There were murmurs of agreement and a few nervous glances among the newer members. "First things first," Harry continued. "The buddy system. In Hogsmeade, people who stayed together generally fared better than those caught alone. He paired everyone up, making sure newer students were matched with more experienced DA members. Then he demonstrated a coordinated shielding technique where partners cast complementary shield charms to create a more robust barrier. "One person shields high, the other low," he explained. "Or one front, one back. The key is communication and awareness of your partner's position." The session progressed well, with Harry moving from pair to pair, offering suggestions and corrections. As he helped Neville and Luna coordinate their timing, he felt a familiar weight in his pocket shift, the probability compass Cronius had given him. Curious, Harry slipped it out and glanced down. The rings were spinning rapidly, occasionally aligning into what looked like an arrow pointing toward the door. Before he could wonder what that meant, the door burst open, and Draco Malfoy strode in with Crabbe and Goyle flanking him. The room fell silent. Every wand turned toward the intruders. Well, Malfoy drawled, though Harry thought he detected a hint of nervousness beneath the bravado. "Potter's little army, hard at work. How did you find us?" Hermione demanded, stepping forward. "You're not as subtle as you think, Granger," Malfoy replied. "Half the school knows about your secret club." Harry moved to the front of the group, keeping his wand steady but not raising it aggressively. "What do you want, Malfoy?" Something flickered in Malfoy's pale eyes, uncertainty. Fear. It was gone so quickly Harry couldn't be sure. "Believe it or not, Potter, I'm not here to cause trouble," Malfoy said, his usual sneer softening into something more complex. "I want in." A chorus of disbelieving snorts and mutters erupted from the DA members. Ron actually laughed out loud. "You," he scoffed. "Why would we let you join when your father was one of the Death Eaters in Hogsmeade?" A flash of something, pain. Anger, crossed Malfoy's face before the mask of cool indifference returned. "That's precisely why, Weasley. Not all of us are eager to follow our father's footsteps." Harry studied Malfoy carefully. In all the years he'd known him, Malfoy had never shown any sign of turning against his family's allegiance to Voldemort. What had changed? The probability compass in Harry's hand suddenly grew warm. When he glanced down, all its rings had aligned perfectly, forming a pattern like a starburst. A nexus point, Cronius had called it, a moment of heightened significance. "Everyone take 5, Harry decided. "Malfoy, a word in private." Ignoring the protests from Ron and several other DA members, Harry led Malfoy to a small alcove that had conveniently appeared in the corner of the room, complete with privacy screens. "All right, Malfoy," Harry said once they were alone. "What's really going on? This isn't like you." Malfoy's confident posture sagged slightly as soon as they were out of sight of the others. "You don't know me as well as you think, Potter." "Then enlighten me." Harry leaned against the wall, trying to project calm curiosity rather than suspicion. Why the sudden interest in fighting against Voldemort? Malfoy flinched at the name but held Harry's gaze. It's not sudden. Things have been difficult at home since the Dark Lord returned. My father's failure at the Ministry last year hasn't improved matters. And Hogsmeade was what, the last straw? Something like that. Malfoy ran a hand through his usually immaculate hair, messing it up in a very un-Malfoy-like gesture. Look, I don't expect you to welcome me with open arms. But I'm not interested in ending up in Azkaban, or worse, for a cause I don't believe in anymore. The probability compass vibrated against Harry's palm. He glanced down to see its ring spinning rapidly again, as if processing possibilities. What is that thing? Malfoy asked, noticing the device. A tool for making decisions, Harry said vaguely. He slipped it back into his pocket and considered Malfoy's request. Part of him, a large part, wanted to tell Malfoy to get lost. After years of antagonism, trusting him seemed foolish at best, dangerous at worst. But another part of Harry couldn't help wondering, what if Malfoy was genuinely seeking a different path? Wouldn't turning him away only push him further toward Voldemort? If I let you join, Harry said finally, there will be conditions. Strict ones. Malfoy nodded, looking relieved. I expected as much. First, you come alone. No Crabbe, no Goyle, no other Slytherins unless they personally convince me they're sincere. They're not exactly enthusiastic anyway, Malfoy admitted. They only came tonight because I didn't give them much choice. Second, you'll be on probation. One hint that you're reporting back to Umbridge or anyone else, and you're out permanently. Fair enough. And third, Harry continued, you'll need to earn the group's trust. That won't happen overnight, and it won't happen at all if you keep acting like, well, like yourself. A ghost of Malfoy's familiar smirk appeared. You mean I can't call Granger? Don't even finish that sentence, Harry warned. That's exactly the kind of thing I'm talking about. Relax, Potter. I was going to say, know-it-all. Malfoy's expression grew serious again. I understand. No antagonizing the happy band of Gryffindors and their friends. I can manage that. Harry wasn't entirely convinced, but the probability compass had grown still in his pocket, its rings aligned in a pattern that somehow felt right. Fine, he decided. You can stay for tonight's session. We'll see how it goes. When they returned to the main room, the reaction to Harry's decision was about what he'd expected, disbelief from most, outrage from some, Ron chief among them, and calculating acceptance from a few, including, surprisingly, Hermione. Have you lost your mind? Ron hissed as they regrouped. It's Malfoy. I know who he is, Ron, Harry replied calmly. But people can change. Not him. It's obviously a trap. Hermione placed a restraining hand on Ron's arm. Let's see what happens. Harry must have his reasons. The rest of the session was tense but productive. To everyone's surprise, Malfoy kept a low profile, focusing on the exercises and refraining from his usual cutting remarks. He was actually quite skilled at defensive magic, Harry noted, not surprising given his upbringing, but useful nonetheless. As the meeting wound down, Harry found himself watching Malfoy with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. Something had definitely changed in his longtime rival, but what? The probability compass remained quiet in Harry's pocket, neither warning nor reassuring him about his decision. He supposed that was the point Cronius had been making, sometimes you had to trust your own judgment without magical guidance. After dismissing the group, Harry hung back to secure the room. As he was checking the training dummies for damage, he heard footsteps behind him. That was unexpectedly civil, Hermione said, coming to stand beside him. Malfoy, you mean? She nodded. I was sure he'd revert to form within 5 minutes, but he actually seemed to be making an effort. Maybe he really does want to change sides, Harry suggested. Maybe. Hermione didn't sound convinced. Or maybe he has other motives we can't see yet. Harry fingered the probability compass in his pocket. I guess we'll find out. Speaking of things we can't see, Hermione said carefully, have you noticed anything strange about Professor Cronus lately? Strange how? I'm not sure exactly. She frowned. It's just, the things he knows, the way he talks about time and prediction. And then there's his name. What about it? Cronus. It's derived from chronos, the Greek word for time. Hermione gave him a significant look. Bit on the nose for someone who specializes in temporal magic, don't you think? Harry hadn't considered that. You think it's not his real name? I think there's more to our new professor than he's letting on, Hermione replied. And I think he has a particular interest in you, Harry. Before Harry could respond, Ron burst back into the room, looking agitated. Harry! You've got to see this. He thrust a piece of parchment into Harry's hands. It was the evening edition of the Daily Prophet, delivered during the DA meeting. The headline made Harry's stomach drop, Azkaban breakout, multiple high-security prisoners escape. Scanning the article quickly, Harry learned that several Death Eaters, including Antonin Dolohov and Augustus Rookwood, had escaped during what appeared to be a coordinated attack on the prison. The Ministry was blaming the remaining Dementors, who had finally abandoned their posts to join Voldemort openly. This is bad, Harry muttered, passing the paper to Hermione. Really bad, Ron agreed. Dad says they've been expecting something like this since the Hogsmeade attack failed, but not so soon. A chill ran down Harry's spine as Professor Cronus' words echoed in his mind. What if the attack was merely a prelude? What if preventing it has set in motion other events, perhaps worse ones, that you cannot see? Had their intervention in Hogsmeade somehow accelerated Voldemort's timeline? Had they inadvertently made things worse? The probability compass grew suddenly hot in Harry's pocket. When he pulled it out, the rings were spinning wildly, refusing to settle into any discernible pattern. What's that? Ron asked, momentarily distracted from the newspaper. Something Professor Cronus gave me, Harry explained. It's supposed to help with making decisions, but right now it just seems confused. Like all of us, then, Ron said grimly, turning back to the newspaper. What do we do about this, Harry? Harry stared at the headline, feeling a familiar sense of helplessness creeping in. Without the Mirror of Destiny, he had no way of knowing what Voldemort planned to do with his newly freed followers. No way of preparing for whatever attack might come next. We keep training, he decided finally, pocketing the still agitated probability compass. We prepare as best we can. And we stay alert for any sign of what Voldemort's planning. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was all he had. As they left the room of requirement, Harry couldn't help thinking that somewhere in Hogwarts, locked away by Dumbledore's magic, the Mirror of Destiny might be showing exactly what they needed to know. 2 weeks after the Azkaban breakout, Harry found himself in the unlikeliest of situations, studying with Draco Malfoy. They sat in a quiet corner of the library, surrounded by books on advanced defensive magic. Nearby, Hermione was helping Neville with a particularly difficult Transfiguration essay while Ron played wizard chess with Luna, who kept suggesting moves that made no logical sense but somehow worked. I still don't understand why the Patronus charm is considered light magic when it can cause permanent damage to dark creatures, Malfoy was saying, his brow furrowed as he read from Conceptual Boundaries in Magical Classification. Because intent matters, Harry replied, surprised to find himself actually engaged in a thoughtful discussion with Malfoy of all people. The Patronus isn't designed to harm, it's a manifestation of happiness and hope. The fact that Dementors can't tolerate those emotions isn't the primary purpose of the spell. Malfoy considered this, then nodded slowly. So it's about the caster's objective rather than the effect? That makes sense, I suppose. Harry couldn't help but marvel at how dramatically their relationship had shifted in such a short time. After that first tense DA meeting, Malfoy had continued to show up, gradually earning if not the trust, then at least the grudging acceptance of most members. He worked hard, asked intelligent questions, and, most surprisingly, kept his usual sneering attitude in check. Ron still maintained it was all an elaborate ruse, but even he had to admit that Malfoy hadn't done anything to justify expulsion from the group. "Can you cast a Patronus?" Malfoy asked suddenly, looking up from his book. "Yeah, since third year," Harry said. "It's a stag." "Show me sometime." There was no challenge in Malfoy's voice, only genuine curiosity. "Sure. We could work on it at the next DA meeting if you want." Malfoy nodded, returning to his reading. Harry studied him surreptitiously, still trying to puzzle out this new version of his longtime rival. The changes went beyond behavior. Malfoy looked different too. Thinner, paler, with dark circles under his eyes suggesting he wasn't sleeping well. Whatever had prompted his defection from Voldemort's cause, it was clearly taking a toll. The probability compass, which Harry now carried everywhere, gave a small twitch in his pocket. He'd grown somewhat accustomed to its quirks, learning that a gentle vibration often preceded meaningful conversations or decisions. Sure enough, Malfoy closed his book a moment later and said quietly, "Potter, there's something you should know." Harry tensed slightly. "What is it?" Malfoy glanced around to ensure no one was listening, then leaned closer. "The Dark Lord is looking for something. Something at Hogwarts." "What kind of something?" Harry asked, instantly alert. "I don't know exactly. My father mentioned it in a letter, cryptically, of course, in case it was intercepted. But it's an object of some kind, something with special powers." Harry's mind immediately jumped to the Mirror of Destiny. Could Voldemort somehow have learned about it? "When did you get this letter?" he asked carefully. 3 days ago. I've been debating whether to tell you." Malfoy's expression was troubled. "There's more. He said Dumbledore has hidden it, but the Dark Lord believes a student might be able to access it where he cannot." A cold weight settled in Harry's stomach. "He wants you to find it." Malfoy nodded miserably. Father didn't say that explicitly, but the implication was clear. "My redemption for the family's recent failures depends on my success. Do you know where to start looking?" "No, and I don't want to." Malfoy met Harry's eyes directly. "I meant what I said about not wanting to follow that path anymore, Potter. But my position is complicated." Harry understood more than Malfoy probably realized. The weight of expectation, the pressure to fulfill a role assigned by others, these were familiar burdens. "Thank you for telling me," he said sincerely. "We'll figure something out." The probability compass gave another pulse, stronger this time. Harry slipped his hand into his pocket and felt the rings aligned in a pattern he'd come to associate with significant revelations. "I need to talk to Dumbledore," he decided. "He should know Voldemort's looking for something at Hogwarts." Malfoy nodded, looking relieved to have shared his burden. "I'll keep you informed if I learn anything more specific." As they packed up their books, Harry found himself in the bizarre position of feeling grateful to Draco Malfoy. If someone had suggested such a thing even a month ago, he'd have thought they were under the Imperius curse. The probability compass hummed contentedly in his pocket, its rings settling into a balanced alignment that seemed to approve of this unexpected alliance. "Acid pops," Harry told the stone gargoyle guarding the entrance to Dumbledore's office. It sprang aside, revealing the familiar spiral staircase. As Harry ascended, he rehearsed what he would say. He needed to warn Dumbledore about Voldemort's interest in a hidden object at Hogwarts without revealing that Malfoy was his source. He also wanted to ask, subtly, whether the Mirror of Destiny was still in the castle or if Dumbledore had moved it elsewhere. But when he reached the top of the stairs, voices from within the office made him pause before knocking. "Cannot simply hide and hope for the best, Albus," Professor McGonagall was saying, her Scottish accent more pronounced than usual, as it tended to be when she was upset. "The attacks are increasing in both frequency and boldness." "I am well aware, Minerva." Dumbledore's voice sounded weary. "But we must proceed cautiously. To move prematurely would be to risk everything." "And what of Potter?" That was Professor Cronius, his deep voice instantly recognizable. He grows more restless by the day. The boy needs guidance, not riddles and half-truths. Harry froze, his knuckles an inch from the door. They were talking about him. Harry has shown remarkable resilience and judgment, Dumbledore replied. I believe he will make the right choices when the time comes. The right choices, Cronius echoed, a hint of frustration in his tone. Without the proper context, even the wisest decisions can lead to disaster. You know this better than most, Albus. Perhaps, Dumbledore conceded. But some knowledge is too dangerous to share prematurely. The burden would be too great. The burden is already great, McGonagall interjected. Potter faces it whether we acknowledge it or not. I agree with Artemis, the boy deserves more than we've given him. There was a long pause before Dumbledore spoke again. I will consider your counsel, both of you. Now, I believe we have a visitor at the door. Come in, Harry. Harry jumped, startled that Dumbledore had known he was there. Composing himself quickly, he opened the door and stepped into the office. I'm sorry to interrupt, professors, he said, trying not to look as though he'd been eavesdropping. Not at all, Harry, Dumbledore smiled, though Harry thought he looked unusually tired. We were just concluding our discussion. Professors McGonagall and Cronius were expressing some concerns about recent events. McGonagall nodded briskly. I'll leave you to speak with Potter, Albus. But do consider what we've said. She gave Harry a small, tight smile as she passed him on her way out. Professor Cronius lingered a moment longer, studying Harry with those penetrating grey eyes. Remember what I told you about anticipation, Mr. Potter. Sometimes the best defense is recognizing the pattern before it completes. With that cryptic remark, he too departed. Once they were alone, Dumbledore gestured for Harry to take a seat. What brings you to my office this evening, Harry? Harry decided to get straight to the point. I have information that Voldemort is looking for something hidden at Hogwarts, sir. Something you've concealed. Dumbledore's expression didn't change, but Harry noticed his eyes sharpen with interest. Indeed? And what is the source of this information? I'd rather not say, sir, Harry said carefully. But I believe it's reliable. I see. Dumbledore steepled his fingers, regarding Harry thoughtfully over his half-moon spectacles. And you believe this something might be the Mirror of Destiny? Harry blinked, caught off guard by Dumbledore's directness. It seems possible, sir. Is it still at Hogwarts? The mirror is secure, Dumbledore replied, neither confirming nor denying its location. But I doubt it is what Voldemort seeks. His interests lie elsewhere at present. Then what, I cannot say with certainty, Dumbledore interrupted gently. But I assure you, Harry, I am aware of Voldemort's activities and am taking all necessary precautions to protect both the school and its students. Harry felt a flicker of frustration. Once again, Dumbledore was being vague, offering reassurance without actual information. Sir, he pressed, if Voldemort is planning something that involves Hogwarts, shouldn't we know what it is? How can we prepare if we don't know what's coming? Dumbledore sighed, suddenly looking every one of his many years. A fair question, Harry. But sometimes knowing too much too soon can be as dangerous as knowing too little too late. There are delicate balances at work that must not be disturbed prematurely. The probability compass vibrated in Harry's pocket, its rings shifting restlessly as if responding to the tension in the room. Does this have something to do with the prophecy? Harry asked, remembering the fragment he'd heard at the end of last year. About neither of us being able to live while the other survives. It is all connected, Dumbledore acknowledged. But the connections are complex, and not all are ready to be revealed. With all due respect, Professor, Harry said, struggling to keep his voice level, I'm tired of being kept in the dark. People are dying. Voldemort's getting stronger. And I'm supposed to be the one who can stop him, but I don't even know what I'm up against. Dumbledore studied him for a long moment, his blue eyes unusually solemn. "You are right to feel frustrated, Harry. And perhaps I have been too cautious in what I've shared with you. It is difficult to find the balance between preparing you for what lies ahead and preserving what childhood remains to you." "I haven't been a child since Voldemort killed my parents," Harry said quietly. "No," Dumbledore agreed sadly. "I suppose you haven't." He rose from his desk and moved to a cabinet near Fawkes Perch. The Phoenix watched with intelligent eyes as Dumbledore withdrew a small stone basin inscribed with runes, the pensive Harry had seen before. "I had planned to begin sharing certain memories with you later in the term," Dumbledore explained, "but perhaps now is the appropriate time to start. These memories will help you understand Voldemort, his origins, his nature, and potentially his weaknesses." Harry felt a surge of anticipation. Finally, some real information. "Before we begin, however," Dumbledore continued, "I must ask about something you brought with you tonight." He gestured toward Harry's pocket. "May I see Professor Cronius' gift?" Harry hesitated, surprised that Dumbledore knew about the probability compass. Then again, there seemed to be very little that escaped the headmaster's notice. He withdrew the silver device and placed it on the desk. Dumbledore examined it with evident interest, watching as the ring spun and aligned into various patterns. "Fascinating. A genuine probability compass, quite rare, and extraordinarily difficult to calibrate properly. It seems Professor Cronius thinks highly of you, Harry. He said it would help me make decisions without needing to see the future directly," Harry explained. "A wise approach," Dumbledore nodded. "The compass doesn't show what will happen, only the moments when your choices matter most. It encourages mindfulness rather than dependence." He handed the device back to Harry. "Use it well. Now, shall we explore some memories that may shed light on our current situation?" For the next hour, Harry was immersed in Dumbledore's memories of a young Tom Riddle, his discovery at the orphanage, his early signs of cruelty and power, his obsession with his heritage. By the time they emerged from the pensive, Harry's head was swimming with new information. "This is just the beginning, Harry," Dumbledore said as they settled back into their chairs. "There is much more to learn about Tom Riddle's journey to becoming Lord Voldemort. We will continue these lessons throughout the term." "Thank you, sir," Harry said, genuinely grateful despite his earlier frustration. "This helps." "I hope so." Dumbledore's expression grew serious again. "Now, regarding your warning about Voldemort seeking something at Hogwarts, I will investigate further. In the meantime, I must ask you to be vigilant but discreet. If Voldemort has agents within the school, we don't want to alert them to our awareness." Harry thought immediately of Malfoy, with his complicated position as both informant and potential spy. "I understand, Professor." As he stood to leave, Dumbledore added, "And Harry? While the Mirror of Destiny is indeed secured, I would caution against focusing too much on its potential. The future it showed you was but one possibility among many. Your choices now, in the present, matter far more than any glimpse of what might be." Harry nodded, though in his heart, he wasn't entirely convinced. That final vision of Voldemort's defeat had felt so real, so attainable. Without it, he was stumbling forward in the dark again, guided only by fragments of memories and a compass that spoke in riddles of probability. "Good night, Professor," he said, pocketing the probability compass and heading for the door. "Good night, Harry," Dumbledore replied. "And remember, even in the darkest times, we always have choices." "So Dumbledore didn't actually tell you anything useful," Ron summarized as they huddled in a corner of the Gryffindor common room later that night. "Just showed you some ancient memories of you-know-who as a creepy kid." "It was more than that," Hermione argued. "Understanding Voldemort's psychology could be crucial to defeating him." "I still think he's holding back," Harry said, lowering his voice as a group of third years passed by. "He knows more than he's saying about what Voldemort wants at Hogwarts." The probability compass sat on the table between them, its rings occasionally shifting into new configurations as their conversation progressed. "That thing is distracting," Ron muttered, poking at it with his wand. "What's it doing now?" "Processing possibilities, I think," Harry replied, watching as the rings briefly aligned into what looked like an arrow pointing toward the portrait hole. "Cronius said it would take time for me to learn to interpret it properly." Speaking of Cronius, Hermione said thoughtfully, "Did you notice he was in Dumbledore's office when you arrived?" "Discussing you, specifically?" Harry nodded. "He seemed to think Dumbledore should be telling me more." "So did McGonagall." "That's odd," Hermione frowned. "I mean, I agree with them, but why would the new defense professor be so invested in your situation? He's only known you for a few months." "Maybe he knows something we don't," Ron suggested. "About the prophecy or whatever." The portrait hole opened before Harry could respond, and Ginny climbed through, looking troubled. She spotted them and came over immediately. "Harry, have you seen today's prophet?" she asked without preamble. "No, why?" She pulled a folded newspaper from her bag and spread it on the table. The headline read, "Ministry Official Murdered in Apparent Death Eater Attack." Broderick Bode, Harry read aloud, recognizing the name. "Wasn't he, an unspeakable," Hermione confirmed, scanning the article quickly. "He worked in the Department of Mysteries. They're saying he was tortured before being killed, possibly for information." The probability compass suddenly spun wildly, its rings whirling so fast they blurred into silver discs. When they finally settled, they formed a pattern like interlocking spirals that somehow conveyed a sense of urgency. "That can't be good," Ron muttered, eyeing the device warily. Harry's mind was racing. Bode had worked in the Department of Mysteries, where the Hall of Prophecy was located. Where Voldemort had tried to lure him last year to retrieve the prophecy about them. Voldemort still after the prophecy, he realized. He must think Bode knew something about it. Hermione looked unconvinced. "But the prophecy was destroyed during the battle, wasn't it? What would be the point?" "Maybe he thinks there's another copy," Ginny suggested. "Or that Bode knew its contents." "Or it could be about something else entirely," Hermione countered. "The Department of Mysteries studies all kinds of magical phenomena, time, space, death, thought. And?" Ron prompted when she trailed off, a look of dawning realization on her face. "And prophecy," Hermione whispered. "Divination in its purest form. What if Voldemort isn't looking for the prophecy about him and Harry anymore? What if he's looking for something else related to seeing the future?" Harry's stomach dropped. "Like a mirror that shows what will come instead of what you desire." The probability compass gave a sharp pulse, its rings locking into a perfect star pattern, the same configuration it had shown when Malfoy had asked to join the DA. A nexus point. "We need to talk to Cronius," Harry decided, scooping up the compass and the newspaper. "He knows more about this than he's letting on." "Now?" Ron asked, glancing at his watch. "It's nearly curfew." "This can't wait," Harry insisted, already heading for the portrait hole. "You three stay here, I'll go alone. Less chance of getting caught." Hermione looked ready to protest but then nodded reluctantly. "Be careful, Harry. And take the Marauder's map." Map in one hand and compass in the other, Harry made his way through the darkening corridors toward the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor's office. The compass grew warmer with each step, its rings shifting between patterns as if trying to communicate something urgently. When he reached Cronius' door, he hesitated only briefly before knocking. There was a long pause before a voice called, "Enter." The office looked different than it had under previous professors. Gone were Lockhart's self-portraits, Lupin's mysterious creatures, Fake Moody's dark detectors, and Umbridge's kitten plates. In their place were astronomical models, intricate clockwork devices, and bookshelves filled with ancient tomes. Professor Cronius sat behind his desk, a large star chart spread out before him. He didn't seem surprised to see Harry. "Mr. Potter," he said, setting aside a quill. "I've been expecting you." "You have?" Harry asked, momentarily thrown off balance. Cronius gestured to the compass in Harry's hand. That device doesn't just guide you, Harry. It creates a connection between its maker and its user. I've felt it growing more agitated all evening. You made the probability compass? Harry asked, though somehow he wasn't surprised. A long time ago, yes. Cronius waved to a chair opposite his desk. Sit. I assume this visit concerns Broderick Bode's murder and its potential connection to certain artifacts of temporal significance. Harry took the offered seat, studying Cronius with new suspicion and curiosity. Who are you, really? And how do you know so much about what's happening? Cronius smiled faintly. Direct as always. Very well, Harry. I am exactly who I appear to be, a professor of defense against the dark arts with a particular interest in temporal magic and its consequences. As for how I know what I know. He hesitated. Let's just say I have experience with how events unfold when certain choices are made. That's not an answer. No, it isn't, Cronius agreed. Some questions are more dangerous than others, Harry. But I can tell you this much, Voldemort is indeed seeking a means of divining the future. The murder of Broderick Bode is part of that pursuit. The Mirror of Destiny, Harry said. He knows about it somehow. Cronius nodded slowly. It appears so. Though how he learned of its existence remains unclear. The probability compass pulsed again, and Harry noticed Cronius' eyes drop to it. It's trying to tell me something, Harry said, watching the rings form and reform into complex patterns. But I don't know how to read it properly. The compass responds to decision points and their potential outcomes, Cronius explained. Right now, it senses a critical juncture approaching, one where your choices may have far-reaching consequences. What choices? What consequences? Cronius leaned forward, his gray eyes intense. Harry, there are forces at work here beyond even Voldemort's understanding. The Mirror of Destiny isn't simply a tool for seeing potential futures, it's a nexus of temporal energy. In the wrong hands, it could be used to manipulate probability itself, to coerce certain outcomes at the expense of others. Dumbledore said it was secure, Harry argued. For now, Cronius agreed. But security can be breached, especially when the Seeker has inside help. Harry immediately thought of Malfoy's revelation that Voldemort believed a student might access what he could not. You think someone at Hogwarts is working for him? I think Voldemort rarely acts without preparation, Cronius replied carefully. And I think certain futures become more likely when key individuals are manipulated into specific choices. The probability compass suddenly grew ice-cold in Harry's hand. When he looked down, its rings had frozen into a pattern resembling a cage or trap. Something bad is coming, isn't it? Harry asked quietly. Something transformative, Cronius corrected. Whether good or bad depends partly on the choices you make in the days ahead. He stood and moved to a window overlooking the moonlit grounds. Harry, I must ask you to be extremely cautious. Trust your instincts, but question your assumptions. Not everyone who appears to be an ally is one, and not every enemy remains so forever. You mean Malfoy, Harry guessed. Cronius turned, his expression unreadable. I mean everyone, myself included. Times of crisis reveal true natures, for better or worse. He returned to his desk and scribbled something on a piece of parchment, which he then sealed with a tap of his wand. If something happens to me, he said, handing the sealed note to Harry, give this to Dumbledore. Not before. Why would something happen to you? Harry asked, alarmed. Probability suggests various outcomes, Cronius said with a small smile. I prefer to be prepared for all of them. He glanced at the clock on his wall. It's well past curfew, Harry. You should return to your dormitory. And keep that compass close, it may prove more valuable than you yet realize. As Harry stood to leave, he felt certain he was missing something important. Cronius knew far more than he was sharing, but unlike with Dumbledore's evasions, Harry sensed the professor was trying to guide him toward understanding rather than simply withholding information. "Professor," he said at the door, "one more question. If Voldemort does somehow get the mirror, what would he do with it?" Cronius' expression darkened. "He would attempt to ensure a future where he is victorious and you are defeated. And in doing so, he might unravel the very fabric of possibility itself." With that ominous statement echoing in his mind, Harry made his way back to Gryffindor Tower, the probability compass cold and still in his pocket. The following days brought a flurry of disturbing news. 3 more Ministry officials with connections to the Department of Mysteries had disappeared. A village in northern Scotland had been attacked by giants, leaving dozens dead. And closest to home, security at Hogwarts had been visibly increased, with Aurors now patrolling the corridors and grounds. Through it all, Harry found himself increasingly reliant on the probability compass. He checked it before every decision, from which route to take to classes to whether to confront Snape about an unfair grade. Sometimes its guidance was clear, rings aligned into obvious patterns of warning or encouragement. Other times it remained frustratingly ambiguous, spinning endlessly without settling. "You're obsessed with that thing," Ron observed as they walked to the Quidditch pitch for practice. "Almost as bad as you were with the mirror." "It's different," Harry insisted, though he wasn't entirely convinced of that himself. "The compass doesn't show me what to do, it just helps me recognize important moments." "If you say so," Ron shrugged. "But you've been checking it every 5 minutes all day." Harry couldn't deny that. The compass had been unusually active since his conversation with Cronius, its rings rarely settling into stable patterns for long. Something significant was brewing, but what? Quidditch practice offered a brief respite from his worries. Soaring through the crisp autumn air, focusing only on the golden snitch, Harry felt the constant tension in his shoulders ease slightly. This, at least, was simple and straightforward. But as practice ended and the team trudged back toward the castle, Harry noticed a figure waiting at the edge of the pitch. Draco Malfoy stood alone, his pale face drawn with what looked like fear. "Go ahead," Harry told Ron and the others. "I'll catch up." "It's Malfoy," Ron said warily. "Want me to stay?" "I'll be fine," Harry assured him, fingering the probability compass in his pocket. It had grown suddenly warm, its rings aligning into a clear signal of importance. Once the others were out of earshot, Harry approached Malfoy. "What is it?" "They're coming," Malfoy said without preamble, his voice barely above a whisper. "Tonight. Through the room of requirement." Harry's blood ran cold. "Who's coming? Death Eaters?" Malfoy nodded, his face even paler than usual. "My father sent instructions. They've found a way to create a passage between the Vanishing Cabinet in Borgin and Berks and its twin here at Hogwarts. They'll use it to bypass the school's defenses." "How do they know about the cabinets?" Harry demanded. "And why tell me now?" "I told them," Malfoy admitted, looking miserable. "Earlier this year, before I changed my mind about everything. I'm sorry, Potter. I didn't know what to do, so I stalled as long as I could, but they're getting suspicious. If I don't help them tonight, they'll know I've betrayed them." The probability compass pulsed urgently in Harry's hand, its rings forming the starburst pattern that signaled a critical decision point. "We need to tell Dumbledore," Harry said immediately. "He can set a trap, catch them when they arrive." "No." Malfoy grabbed Harry's arm, his eyes wild with panic. "You don't understand. If they're caught, they'll know I warned you. The Dark Lord will kill my mother." Harry hesitated, torn between the obvious need to alert the school's defenders and Malfoy's genuine terror for his family. "What about Professor Cronius?" he suggested. "He might know a way to handle this without exposing you." "Why would he help me?" Malfoy asked bitterly. "I'm a Malfoy. Son of a Death Eater." "He might surprise you," Harry said, remembering Cronius' words about allies and enemies not always being what they seemed. "And he understands complicated situations better than most." The probability compass shifted, its rings realigning into a pattern that somehow conveyed approval. "Fine," Malfoy agreed reluctantly. But we need to hurry. They're planning to come through around midnight. They made their way to Cronius' office as casually as they could, trying not to attract attention. To Harry's relief, the professor was there, bent over what appeared to be the same star chart he'd been studying during Harry's last visit. "Mr. Potter, Mr. Malfoy," he greeted them, setting aside his work. "This is an unexpected pairing." "We have a problem, Professor," Harry said, closing the door firmly behind them. "Death Eaters are planning to enter Hogwarts tonight." Cronius showed no surprise at this information. "I see. And you come to me rather than the headmaster because the situation is complicated," Harry explained, glancing at Malfoy. "There are conflicting loyalties involved." Understanding dawned in Cronius' eyes. "Ah. Mr. Malfoy finds himself caught between two worlds, I take it. Family obligations versus newly discovered conscience." Malfoy flushed but didn't deny it. "My mother will die if the Dark Lord discovers I've betrayed him." Cronius regarded him thoughtfully. "A difficult position indeed. Tell me everything, how they plan to enter, when, and what their objective is." Malfoy explained about the vanishing cabinets, his voice steadying as he provided details about the planned infiltration. "They're after something specific," he concluded. "My father wouldn't say exactly what, but it's somewhere in the castle, something Dumbledore has hidden." "The Mirror of Destiny," Harry said, looking to Cronius for confirmation. The professor nodded grimly. "It seems the most likely target, given Voldemort's recent interests." "What is this mirror?" Malfoy asked, confused. "A powerful artifact that shows potential futures," Cronius explained. "In Voldemort's hands, it could be devastating to our cause." He rose and began pacing the office, his expression thoughtful. "We cannot simply alert Dumbledore without compromising Mr. Malfoy's position, yet we cannot allow Death Eaters free access to Hogwarts. A delicate balance is required." The probability compass spun rapidly in Harry's hand, its rings refusing to settle into any clear pattern, as if multiple futures were competing for dominance. "What if we sabotage the cabinet?" Harry suggested. "Make it seem like it malfunctioned?" "Too risky," Cronius shook his head. "If they suspect deliberate tampering, they'll still blame Mr. Malfoy." "We could let them in but set a trap further along," Malfoy proposed hesitantly. "Make it look like they were caught by chance." Cronius considered this. "Better, but still problematic. We'd need to ensure they're intercepted before they can reach their objective, yet in a way that appears coincidental rather than planned." He stopped pacing suddenly, his eyes lighting up with an idea. "Or perhaps, we give them what they want, but not what they expect." "What do you mean?" Harry asked. "The Mirror of Destiny can show many futures, Mr. Potter, not all of them true." Cronius smiled enigmatically. "With the right preparation, it might show Voldemort exactly what we want him to see." "You want to trick him?" Malfoy sounded both impressed and terrified. "Is that even possible?" "With considerable risk, yes." Cronius moved to a cabinet and withdrew a small vial of silvery liquid. "This is a rare substance called Tempus Fluid. It can temporarily alter the reflective properties of enchanted mirrors, causing them to show specific visions rather than their usual reflections. But we'd need access to the mirror first," Harry pointed out. "And Dumbledore has it hidden." "Indeed," Cronius agreed. "Which means we must either convince the headmaster to cooperate with our plan, thereby risking Mr. Malfoy's cover, or we must locate and access the mirror ourselves before the Death Eaters arrive." The probability compass suddenly warmed in Harry's hand, its rings settling into a clear arrow pattern pointing directly at Cronius. "You know where it is," Harry realized. Cronius didn't deny it. "I have suspicions. But retrieving it will be dangerous, and we have little time." "I'll do it," Harry volunteered immediately. "Just tell me where to look." "Not alone," Cronius said firmly. "This requires precision and expertise in temporal magic. I will accompany you. He turned to Malfoy. Mr. Malfoy, you will need to maintain your cover. Return to your dormitory as if nothing is amiss. When the appointed time comes, you should be near the room of requirement but not directly involved. If questioned later, you can truthfully say you were aware of the plan but experienced last-minute doubts that kept you from participating fully. Malfoy nodded, looking relieved to have clear instructions. What about Potter? Won't they be suspicious if he happens to be there too? Mr. Potter will not be anywhere near the room of requirement tonight, Cronus replied. He will be with me, ensuring the mirror is properly prepared for our unexpected guests. He checked his pocket watch. It's nearly 7 now. The Death Eaters plan to arrive around midnight, correct? Malfoy nodded. Then we have 5 hours to locate the mirror, apply the Tempus fluid, and set our trap. Cronus moved to a trunk in the corner of his office and began rummaging through it. Mr. Malfoy, you may go. Remember, act normally, stay visible in common areas until curfew, then position yourself near but not at the room of requirement. After Malfoy left, Harry turned to Cronus. You're really not going to tell Dumbledore? The headmaster has many concerns at present, Cronus said carefully. And while I respect his judgment immensely, I believe this particular situation requires a more nuanced approach than he might prefer. He withdrew a folded piece of silvery fabric from the trunk, an invisibility cloak, Harry realized with surprise. Besides, Cronus added with a small smile, some events must unfold in specific ways to achieve the optimal outcome. The compass knows this, even if we don't yet see the full pattern. Harry glanced down at the device in his hand. Its rings had settled into a complex but stable configuration that somehow conveyed both warning and determination. Where exactly are we going? He asked as Cronus handed him the invisibility cloak. To a place few at Hogwarts know exists, the professor replied enigmatically. The chronomantic chamber, deep beneath the astronomy tower. The chronomantic chamber, as it turned out, was accessed through a hidden door behind a large astronomical clock in the base of the astronomy tower. Cronus revealed the entrance with a complex series of taps from his wand, murmuring what sounded like equations rather than spells. Few wizards study true temporal magic, he explained as they descended a narrow spiral staircase. It's considered too dangerous, too unpredictable. But Hogwarts has always been a haven for all branches of magical knowledge, even those that have fallen out of favor. The staircase ended at a circular room with a domed ceiling painted to resemble the night sky. The walls were lined with strange instruments, many resembling the silver devices in Dumbledore's office but larger and more complex. In the center stood a plinth draped in midnight blue velvet. Is that? Harry began, pointing to the covered object. The Mirror of Destiny, Cronus confirmed. Dumbledore moved it here after taking it from your discovery, believing it would be secure in a chamber few know exists. How did you know about it? Cronus smiled enigmatically. Let's just say temporal magic has been an interest of mine for many years. There are few places dedicated to its study that I haven't visited at some point. He approached the plinth and carefully removed the velvet covering, revealing the familiar golden-framed mirror. Its surface rippled slightly in the dim light, as if eager to show new visions. Don't look directly into it, Cronus warned. Not yet. The mirror remembers those who gaze into it, and we need it to be receptive to our modifications. He withdrew the vial of Tempus fluid from his robes and uncorked it carefully. The silvery substance inside seemed to move with a life of its own, swirling and pulsing as if responding to the mirror's proximity. What exactly are we going to show Voldemort? Harry asked, watching as Cronus began drawing complex patterns in the air with his wand. A future where he believes he's succeeded, Cronus replied, his focus on the delicate spell work. But one that contains a fatal flaw, a seemingly minor detail that will lead him to make a crucial mistake in his real plans. What kind of mistake? That depends on what he's truly after. Cronus paused his wand movements. The mirror itself will help us determine that. It can sense the questions in the viewer's mind and show relevant futures. He gestured for Harry to stand opposite him, on the other side of the mirror. I need your help for this part. The fluid requires direction from two magical signatures, one to anchor it to the mirror, one to shape the visions it will produce. Following Cronius' instructions, Harry placed his hands on the mirror's frame, being careful not to look into its reflective surface. The professor began pouring the Tempus fluid in a thin stream over the top of the mirror while continuing to trace patterns with his wand. The fluid didn't drip down the surface as Harry expected. Instead, it seemed to be absorbed directly into the glass, causing the entire mirror to glow with a soft silver light. Now, Cronius said quietly, we must focus our thoughts on Voldemort. Imagine him looking into this mirror, seeking guidance for his plans. What would he most want to see? Harry concentrated, drawing on his unwanted mental connection with Voldemort to visualize the Dark Lord's desires. He pictured Voldemort triumphant, Harry dead at his feet, the wizarding world cowering before him. The mirror's surface churned like a storm-tossed sea, reflecting their thoughts and shaping them into potential futures. Cronius murmured complex incantations, his wand moving in increasingly intricate patterns as he guided the mirror's magic. After what seemed like hours but was probably only minutes, the surface settled into a clear image, Voldemort standing in what appeared to be the Department of Mysteries, holding a small, glowing orb in his skeletal hand. His snake-like face was split in a triumphant smile. A prophecy? Harry asked, confused. But the one about us was destroyed. Not that prophecy, Cronius said grimly. A different one. Older, more powerful, and apparently what Voldemort truly seeks. He studied the image with intense concentration. This is what we need. The mirror has shown us Voldemort's deepest goal, to find a prophecy that predates your birth, one that speaks of power beyond normal magic. How do we use this to trick him? We modify the vision, Cronius explained, to show him finding this prophecy in a specific location, one where we can set a trap. The Tempus fluid will make this false future appear utterly convincing, even to Voldemort's considerable magical perception. With careful precision, Cronius altered the background of the vision, changing the Department of Mysteries to a section of Hogwarts that Harry recognized as the 7th-floor corridor near the Room of Requirement. The prophecy orb remained in Voldemort's hand, but now he appeared to be retrieving it from a hidden alcove rather than a ministry shelf. There, Cronius said with satisfaction. When the Death Eaters arrive and eventually find the mirror, they will see this vision, Voldemort finding the prophecy orb near the Room of Requirement itself, hidden in plain sight. But there's no prophecy orb there, Harry pointed out. Precisely. Cronius smiled. They'll search in vain for something that doesn't exist, while the real object of value, the mirror itself, will appear to be merely the tool revealing the prophecy's location. Won't they just take the mirror anyway? They'll try, Cronius agreed, but I'm embedding a secondary enchantment that will activate when they attempt to move it. The mirror will appear to dissolve into mist, seeming to be merely a temporary magical phenomenon rather than a permanent artifact. The professor stepped back, admiring their work. The mirror now glowed with a subtle silvery aura, its surface showing the false vision they had created whenever Harry glanced at it from the corner of his eye. Ingenious, he murmured to himself. Truly inspired. Harry checked his watch. It's almost 11. What now? Now, Cronius said, covering the mirror again with the velvet cloth, we move the mirror to where the Death Eaters will find it, but not too easily. It must appear to be hidden, but not so well that they give up the search. And where's that? The Room of Hidden Things, Cronius replied. A specific manifestation of the Room of Requirement where lost objects accumulate. It's where the broken vanishing cabinet resides that they'll use to enter Hogwarts. He levitated the covered mirror with a flick of his wand. Put on the invisibility cloak, Harry. We must move quickly and without being seen. As they made their way through the castle's darkened corridors, Harry's mind raced with questions. How did Cronius know so much about the Room of Hidden Things? How had he known where Dumbledore had placed the mirror? And most pressingly, Why did this all feel like a carefully orchestrated plan rather than an improvised response to Malfoy's warning? The probability compass pulsed rhythmically in his pocket, neither warning nor reassuring. When he surreptitiously checked it, its rings had formed a pattern he'd never seen before, concentric circles that somehow suggested wheels within wheels, plans within plans. They reached the 7th floor without incident. Cronius paced 3 times before the blank wall opposite Barnabas the Barmy's tapestry, his face screwed up in concentration. A door materialized, larger and more ornate than the one Harry was used to seeing for DA meetings. Quickly, Cronius urged, opening the door to reveal an enormous cathedral-like space filled with thousands of objects, furniture, books, trinkets, clothing, piled in towering heaps and scattered haphazardly across the floor. We don't have much time. They wound their way through the maze of discarded items, Cronius leading with unerring confidence despite the chaotic layout. Finally, they reached a small clearing dominated by a tall, damaged cabinet that Harry assumed was the Hogwarts twin of the one in Borgin and Burke's. Here, Cronius said, placing the still levitating mirror behind a stack of chairs about 20 feet from the cabinet. Close enough to be found during a thorough search, far enough that it won't be the first thing they see. He removed the velvet covering, allowing the mirror's golden frame to catch what little light filtered through the towering piles of junk. Now we wait. They concealed themselves behind a massive broken wardrobe with a good view of both the cabinet and the mirror. Harry checked his watch again, 11:47. The Death Eaters would arrive any minute. Professor, he whispered as they settled into wait, why didn't we set up some kind of alarm to alert the teachers once the Death Eaters arrive? Cronius gave him a measured look. Because, Harry, sometimes it is better to know your enemy's plans than to thwart them prematurely. The Death Eaters will find nothing of value tonight, but we will learn much about their intentions and methods. Before Harry could argue with this logic, the vanishing cabinet began to emit a low, humming sound. Its doors trembled slightly, then swung open to reveal a swirling darkness within. A moment later, a black-robed figure stepped out, wand raised and ready. Bellatrix Lestrange's wild eyes scanned the room as she moved aside to make way for others. For more Death Eaters emerged in quick succession, Dolohov, Rookwood, McNair, and finally, Lucius Malfoy himself. Harry tensed, his hand instinctively tightening around his wand. These were the same people who had tried to kill him in the Department of Mysteries, who had been responsible for Sirius's death. It took every ounce of self-control not to cast a stunning spell immediately. Cronius placed a restraining hand on his arm, as if sensing his thoughts. Patience, he breathed, so quietly that Harry barely heard him. The boy isn't here, Bellatrix hissed, looking around the cluttered room with disappointment. Draco was supposed to meet us. He may have been delayed, Lucius replied smoothly, though Harry could detect a note of concern in his voice. It doesn't matter. We know what we're looking for. A mirror, Rookwood said, his scarred face twisting into a frown. In this place. It could take hours to search properly. Then we'd better start, Dolohov growled. The Dark Lord doesn't tolerate failure. They spread out, moving through the towering piles of discarded objects with wands lit. Harry and Cronius remained perfectly still under the invisibility cloak as Bellatrix passed within feet of their hiding place. It took the Death Eaters nearly 20 minutes of increasingly frustrated searching before McNair called out, "Found something." The others converged on his position, where he stood before the Mirror of Destiny, its surface now swirling with misty images. "Is this it?" Bellatrix asked, approaching the mirror cautiously. "It matches the description," Lucius confirmed, his pale face reflected in the glass. "The Mirror of Destiny. Capable of showing what will come instead of what is desired." Rookwood studied the inscription along the top. "Ostendo quid veniet, non quid cupis." I show what will come, not what you desire. Yes, this is the artifact the Dark Lord seeks. As they gathered around the mirror, its surface cleared to reveal the vision Cronius had engineered, Voldemort finding a prophecy orb hidden near the Room of Requirement. "Look!" Bellatrix exclaimed, pointing at the image. It shows the Dark Lord discovering the prophecy. And it's here, in the castle. Not in this room, Dolohov noted, studying the background of the vision. That's the corridor outside. Lucius frowned. Why would Dumbledore hide a prophecy in a corridor? It makes no sense. Perhaps the old fool thought it too obvious a hiding place, and thus overlooked, Rookwood suggested. Or perhaps the prophecy was moved recently. It doesn't matter, Bellatrix said impatiently. We take the mirror to the Dark Lord as ordered, and he can interpret its visions himself. Lucius nodded. Carefully, now. The enchantments on such an artifact are likely to be complex and potentially dangerous if disturbed. As McNair and Dolohov moved to lift the mirror, Cronius twitched his wand beneath the invisibility cloak. Immediately, the mirror's surface began to swirl more rapidly, the golden frame vibrating slightly. Something's happening, Rookwood warned, stepping back. Don't touch it. Before their eyes, the mirror seemed to dissolve into silvery mist, its solid form becoming increasingly insubstantial until it disappeared entirely, leaving only a faint shimmering in the air that quickly faded to nothing. No! Bellatrix shrieked, lunging forward as if she could somehow grab the vanishing artifact. Where did it go? It was never fully here, Rookwood said, his expertise as an unspeakable evident in his calm analysis. A projection of some kind, or a temporary manifestation. Clever of Dumbledore. But the vision was real, Lucius insisted. The prophecy is hidden somewhere near this room, just as the mirror showed. Bellatrix turned toward the door, her expression maniacal. Then we searched the corridor. Every inch of it. The Death Eaters filed out of the room of hidden things, their lit wands illuminating their path back toward the vanishing cabinet and the exit beyond. Harry and Cronius remained hidden until the last of them had disappeared. It worked, Harry whispered once he was sure they were gone. They fell for it completely. Cronius nodded, his expression grave rather than triumphant. For now. But they'll search the corridor thoroughly and find nothing. That will make them suspicious. What happens to the real mirror? Harry asked, looking to where it had seemingly vanished. A disillusionment charm combined with a minor temporal displacement, Cronius explained. It's still there, just invisible and slightly out of phase with our current time. It will revert to normal in about an hour. He stood, removing the invisibility cloak from them both. We should go. The Death Eaters will soon realize they've been misled, and I'd rather not be here when that happens. They made their way back through the maze of hidden things toward the exit. Harry's mind was buzzing with questions about what they'd just witnessed and what it meant. Professor, he said as they neared the door, Lucius mentioned a prophecy. Do you know what they're really looking for? Cronius hesitated before answering. I have suspicions. There are rumors of an ancient prophecy that predates the founding of Hogwarts itself, one that speaks of a power capable of bending time to one's will. If Voldemort has learned of its existence, he would certainly seek it out. And does this prophecy actually exist? All prophecies exist, Harry, Cronius replied enigmatically. The question is whether they've been recorded, interpreted correctly, and acted upon appropriately. They had reached the door when a cold voice from behind froze them in place. How convenient to find you here, Professor Cronius. And Mr. Potter too. What a delightful surprise. They turned slowly to find Lucius Malfoy standing between two towering piles of discarded furniture, his wand pointed directly at them. His pale face was twisted into a triumphant sneer. I thought it prudent to check back here while my colleagues searched the corridor, he explained smoothly. A fortunate decision, it seems. Harry's hand moved toward his wand, but Lucius was faster. Expelliarmus. The spell hit Harry before he could react, sending his wand flying into Lucius's waiting hand. Cronius remained perfectly still, his own wand held loosely at his side. Good evening, Lucius. I see the years have not improved your judgment. My judgment? Lucius laughed coldly. I'm not the one caught interfering with the Dark Lord's plans. Did you really think your little trick with the mirror would go undetected? I had hoped it might buy us some time, Cronius admitted. Enough to understand what Voldemort truly seeks. Lucius flinched at the name but quickly recovered his composure. What he seeks is no concern of yours. Or rather, it soon won't be. He raised his wand higher. The Dark Lord will be most interested to learn who has been meddling with his affairs. I don't think so, Cronius said calmly. With a movement almost too fast to follow, he flicked his wand toward a tottering pile of objects behind Lucius. The stack collapsed with a tremendous crash, forcing Lucius to dive sideways to avoid being buried. In that moment of distraction, Cronius grabbed Harry's arm and pulled him toward the door. Run, he shouted, pushing Harry ahead of him as spells began to fly past them. They burst through the door into the 7th-floor corridor, only to find themselves face to face with the other Death Eaters returning from their fruitless search. Bellatrix's face lit up with malicious delight at the sight of Harry. Potter! She shrieked, raising her wand. Crucio! Cronius shoved Harry aside, taking the full force of the Cruciatus curse himself. He dropped to one knee, his face contorted in pain but remarkably composed compared to others Harry had seen under the torture curse. Go, Harry! Cronius gasped, somehow maintaining enough focus to cast a shield charm as more spells flew toward them. But Harry couldn't leave him. Drawing the wand he kept as a spare in his sock, a habit he'd developed after the Department of Mysteries, he cast the most powerful stunning spell he could manage at Bellatrix. The red jet of light caught her by surprise, hitting her squarely in the chest and sending her flying backward into Rookwood and McNair, momentarily disrupting their attack. Dolohov recovered first, slashing his wand in the distinctive movement of the curse that had nearly killed Hermione at the Ministry. Cronius deflected it with a circular parry that sent the spell rebounding into a nearby suit of armor, which melted into a puddle of metal. Impressive reflexes, Dolohov acknowledged with a cold smile. But you're outnumbered and surrounded. Lucius had emerged from the room of requirement behind them, cutting off their retreat in that direction. Bellatrix was struggling to her feet, her face twisted with fury. The boy is mine, she snarled, raising her wand again. The Dark Lord wants Potter alive, Lucius reminded her sharply. Alive doesn't mean unharmed, she shot back with a maniacal gleam in her eye. Harry and Cronius stood back to back, surrounded by Death Eaters with nowhere to run. The probability compass in Harry's pocket was vibrating wildly, its rings spinning so fast they were a blur of silver motion. Any ideas, Professor? Harry murmured, his spare wand held ready though he knew they were hopelessly outmatched. Just one, Cronius replied quietly. When I say, now, close your eyes and hold your breath. Before Harry could ask what he meant, Cronius raised his wand in a complex pattern and called out, Tempus Fragmentum. A blinding flash of golden light erupted from his wand, followed by a strange sensation like reality itself was stretching. Harry instinctively closed his eyes as instructed. Now! Cronius shouted. Harry held his breath. The world seemed to twist around him, a feeling similar to apparition but somehow more fundamental, as if the very fabric of existence was being folded and refolded. When the sensation passed and he opened his eyes, he was shocked to find himself and Cronius standing in the astronomy tower, nearly 7 floors away from where they had been seconds ago. What? Harry began, but Cronius silenced him with a gesture, sagging against the tower wall in obvious exhaustion. Temporal displacement, the professor explained between ragged breaths. Extremely difficult, and dangerous. We didn't physically move through space, we moved sideways through time, to a moment when we were already here. But we weren't already here, Harry pointed out, confused. In another potential timeline, we were, Cronius said, sliding down to sit on the floor. I simply made that possibility temporarily real. Harry stared at him in astonishment. That's impossible. Even time-turners don't work that way. Cronius managed a weak smile. Time-turners are crude instruments compared to true chronomancy, Harry. But the cost is significant. Looking at him more closely, Harry realized with alarm that Cronius appeared to have aged several years in the span of minutes. His black hair now had considerably more silver than before, and new lines had appeared around his eyes and mouth. "You're hurt," Harry said, kneeling beside him. "We need to get you to the hospital wing." Cronius shook his head. "No time. The Death Eaters will recover quickly, and call for reinforcements. You need to warn Dumbledore immediately." The probability compass had finally settled in Harry's pocket, its rings aligned in a pattern suggesting urgency mixed with opportunity. "I'm not leaving you here," Harry insisted. "You must," Cronius said firmly. "I've used too much power, need to recover. Dumbledore must know that Voldemort seeks the Tempest Prophecy." He grabbed Harry's arm with surprising strength. "Tell him, the anchor points are shifting. He'll understand." "The what?" "Professor, you're not making sense." "Go, Harry," Cronius urged, his grip weakening. "And remember, not all allies wear the same face throughout time. Trust the compass." With that cryptic statement, his eyes closed, and he slumped into unconsciousness. Harry hesitated only briefly before racing down the tower stairs toward the headmaster's office. The castle was eerily quiet, with no sign of the alarm being raised despite Death Eaters having infiltrated the school. When he reached the gargoyle guarding Dumbledore's office, he was surprised to find it already stepped aside, as if expecting him. He took the spiral staircase 2 steps at a time and burst into the office without knocking. "Professor! Death Eaters in the castle." They came through. He stopped short at the scene before him. Dumbledore was standing calmly behind his desk, apparently unsurprised by either Harry's abrupt entrance or his news. Professor McGonagall and, to Harry's astonishment, Professor Snape stood on either side of him, both looking grim but composed. "We are aware, Harry," Dumbledore said gravely. "The intruders have been contained. Professor Snape alerted us to their plans earlier this evening." Harry stared at Snape in confusion. "You knew? But how?" Snape's lip curled in his usual disdainful expression. "Unlike some, Potter, I do not feel the need to conduct amateur heroics when professional intervention is available." "Severus," Dumbledore said quietly, and Snape fell silent, though his dark eyes continued to bore into Harry with undisguised dislike. "What happened, Harry?" Dumbledore asked. "We detected unusual magical activity near the Room of Requirement and again in the Astronomy Tower." Harry explained everything: Malfoy's warning, Cronius' plan with the mirror, the confrontation with the Death Eaters, and the professor's strange magic that had transported them to safety. "Professor Cronius is injured," he concluded. "He's in the Astronomy Tower, unconscious. He told me to tell you that, the anchor points are shifting and something about a Tempest Prophecy. He said you'd understand." Dumbledore's expression grew increasingly grave as Harry spoke. When he mentioned the Tempest Prophecy, the headmaster exchanged a significant look with McGonagall. "Minerva, please see to Professor Cronius immediately," Dumbledore said. "Take him directly to my private quarters, not the hospital wing. His condition requires specialized attention." As McGonagall hurried out, Dumbledore turned to Snape. "Severus, join the other professors in securing the Death Eaters. I need to speak with Harry alone." Snape nodded curtly and swept from the room, his black robes billowing behind him. Once they were alone, Dumbledore sank into his chair with a weariness Harry had rarely seen him display. "Sit, Harry. There are matters we must discuss that I had hoped to delay until you were better prepared." Harry sat, the probability compass a reassuring weight in his pocket. "What's the Tempest Prophecy, sir? And why does Voldemort want it?" Dumbledore studied him over his half-moon spectacles. "The Tempest Prophecy is perhaps the oldest known prophecy in wizarding history, dating back to the time of Merlin himself. It speaks of a conjunction of powers, temporal magic and sacrificial love, that could potentially alter the very fabric of fate. And Voldemort thinks this could help him defeat me?" Harry guessed. "Not precisely," Dumbledore replied. I believe Tom seeks the prophecy because it offers something he desires even more than your defeat, control over time itself. The power to reshape reality according to his will, to erase defeats and multiply victories. Harry thought of the Mirror of Destiny and how much he had wanted to use it to gain an advantage. Was Voldemort's desire really so different from his own had been? The anchor points Professor Cronius mentioned, Dumbledore continued, refer to fixed moments in time, events so significant that they cannot be altered without catastrophic consequences to the timeline. If these points are shifting, as Artemis suggests, then the stability of our reality may be in jeopardy. Because of what Cronius did to save us? Harry asked, remembering the strange magic the professor had performed. Perhaps, Dumbledore acknowledged. Or perhaps due to other forces at work. Time is a delicate web, Harry. Pull too hard on one thread, and the entire pattern may unravel. The headmaster rose and moved to Fawkes' perch, stroking the phoenix's brilliant plumage absently. I must ask you something important, Harry. The probability compass Professor Cronius gave you, may I see it? Harry reached into his pocket and withdrew the silver device, noting that its rings had settled into a pattern resembling nested spirals. He handed it to Dumbledore, who examined it with evident fascination. Remarkable craftsmanship, the headmaster murmured. I have seen only one other compass of this quality, many years ago. Professor Cronius said he made it himself, Harry mentioned. Did he indeed? Dumbledore's eyes twinkled briefly. That is, most interesting. He returned the compass to Harry. Keep this close, Harry. In the days ahead, its guidance may prove invaluable. The paths before us are multiplying, and choosing wisely has never been more crucial. Sir, Harry said hesitantly, who exactly is Professor Cronius? He knows things, does things that seem impossible. And tonight, when he used that temporal magic, he aged years in seconds. Dumbledore's expression grew solemn. Artemis Cronius is a man out of place in more ways than one, Harry. His knowledge and abilities stem from a lifetime of studying the deepest mysteries of time. As for who he truly is. The headmaster paused. That is a question with a complex answer, one that even I do not fully understand. But you trust him? I do, Dumbledore said simply. And I believe you should as well, despite whatever doubts may arise in the coming days. Before Harry could ask what he meant by that cryptic warning, the office door opened, and Professor McGonagall returned, her face tense with concern. Albus, you need to come quickly. Cronius is, well, you should see for yourself. Dumbledore nodded gravely. Harry, return to Gryffindor Tower for now. We will speak again tomorrow after I have attended to Professor Cronius. But sir, please, Harry, Dumbledore said firmly. You have done enough for tonight. Rest, and be vigilant. The compass will guide you if needed. Recognizing the dismissal, Harry reluctantly left the office, his mind spinning with new questions and concerns. As he made his way back to Gryffindor Tower under the invisibility cloak Cronius had lent him, he couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had changed tonight, that they had crossed some threshold from which there was no returning. The probability compass seemed to agree, its rings now forming a pattern like a doorway or gateway, suggesting transition and irreversible change. When he finally reached the common room, he was surprised to find Ron, Hermione, and Ginny still awake, huddled together near the dying fire with expressions of deep worry. Harry! Hermione exclaimed when he pulled off the invisibility cloak. Where have you been? We've been frantic. Death Eaters, he said simply, collapsing into an armchair. In the castle. Their expressions of shock and alarm would have been comical under different circumstances. As Harry recounted the night's events, their faces grew increasingly grave. So Malfoy really has switched sides? Ron asked skeptically. Or was he playing both ends against the middle? I think he genuinely warned us, Harry said. He could have just let his father and the others in without saying anything. And Professor Cronius, Hermione said thoughtfully. The magic you described, temporal displacement without a time turner, that should be impossible according to everything I've read. A lot of impossible things seem to be happening lately, Harry replied, thinking of the Mirror of Destiny and the mysterious Tempest prophecy. Ginny, who had been quietly listening, spoke up. What happens now? If you know who is after this prophecy about time, what does that mean for us? Harry fingered the probability compass in his pocket, feeling its subtle vibrations as it processed possibilities. I don't know exactly. But I think things are going to get a lot more complicated before they get better. As if to confirm his words, the compass suddenly grew ice-cold against his palm. When he withdrew it to look, the rings had aligned into a pattern like a shattered mirror, fragments spinning in different directions yet somehow maintaining a coherent whole. What does that mean? Ron asked, peering at the device. I'm not sure, Harry admitted. But I think it's warning us that the future we thought we were heading toward has just broken into pieces. Hermione reached out to touch the compass tentatively. Multiple futures, multiple possibilities. Multiple dangers, Ginny added softly. Harry nodded, watching the fractured pattern spin and shift. Exactly. And somehow, we have to find our way through them. The fire had burned down to embers, casting long shadows across their troubled faces. Outside, the night sky was beginning to lighten with the first hints of dawn, a new day bringing new uncertainties and challenges. But as Harry looked at his friend's determined expressions, he felt a flicker of hope beneath his weariness. Whatever fractured futures lay ahead, they would face them together. The probability compass gave a final pulse in his hand before settling into a balanced configuration that somehow conveyed both warning and reassurance, a perfect reflection of Harry's own conflicted feelings as he contemplated what might come next. Chapter 3, The Present Choice. Harry woke with a jolt, his heart hammering against his ribs. Sunlight streamed through a gap in his bed curtains, indicating he'd slept late into the morning. The events of the previous night crashed back into his consciousness: Death Eaters in the castle, Cronius's impossible magic, the mysterious Tempest prophecy. He fumbled for the probability compass on his nightstand. The device felt unusually heavy this morning, its silver rings aligned in a pattern resembling an hourglass, time running out. Harry? Ron's voice came from beyond the curtains. You finally up? Hermione's about to burst through the door any minute. Harry pushed aside the hangings to find Ron already dressed, looking unusually serious. What time is it? Almost 11. McGonagall's cancelled all classes. The whole school's buzzing about what happened last night. Harry swung his legs over the side of the bed, wincing as his muscles protested. What are they saying? All sorts of mental things. That you-know-who himself broke in. That there was a battle in the Room of Requirement. Katie Bell swears she saw Bellatrix Lestrange being marched out by Aurors at dawn. That part's probably true, Harry said, pulling on his robes. What about Professor Cronius? Is he okay? Ron's expression darkened. That's why Hermione's freaking out. He's gone. Gone. What do you mean gone? Just vanished. His office is cleaned out, his quarters empty. Dumbledore made an announcement at breakfast that Cronius had been called away on urgent business and that Snape would be covering defense classes temporarily. Harry's stomach dropped. He remembered how Cronius had aged years in seconds after performing that temporal magic, how McGonagall had rushed Dumbledore to see him. Something had gone very wrong. The door burst open, and Hermione rushed in, ignoring the protests of a few half-dressed boys. Harry. Finally. She thrust a copy of the Daily Prophet into his hands. You need to see this. The headline screamed across the front page: Ministry breach, Department of Mysteries targeted in daring raid. Harry scanned the article quickly, his alarm growing with each paragraph. According to the report, a team of Death Eaters had broken into the Department of Mysteries just hours after the Hogwarts infiltration. Their target appeared to be the Hall of Prophecy, specifically a section containing the oldest recorded prophecies. 2 unspeakables had been killed, and several valuable artifacts were missing. It's connected to what happened here, Hermione said, lowering her voice despite the empty dormitory. They didn't find what they wanted at Hogwarts, so they went straight to the Ministry. Harry nodded grimly, thinking of the Tempest prophecy Dumbledore had mentioned. They're after something that can control time. Voldemort wants to change reality itself. There's something else, Hermione said, hesitation evident in her voice. I went to the library at dawn, researching temporal magic after what you told us about Cronius. I found something odd. She pulled a worn book from her bag, Temporal Anomalies in Magical Theory, and opened it to a marked page. Look at this photograph. Harry and Ron peered at the faded image. It showed a group of wizards in antiquated robes, standing before what appeared to be an early version of a time turner, but much larger and more complex. The caption identified them as the Chronomantic Research Division, Department of Mysteries, 1899. Okay. Ron said, not seeing the significance. Hermione pointed to a wizard standing slightly apart from the others, a tall man with dark hair streaked with silver and penetrating eyes. Despite the old-fashioned clothes and younger appearance, the resemblance was unmistakable. That's Cronius, Harry breathed. But that's impossible. This photo is from 1899. Exactly, Hermione said. And look at the name in the caption. Harry squinted at the tiny print, Artemis Cronus, head researcher. Cronus, not Cronius, Hermione pointed out. One letter different. And there's more. I found references to an A. Cronus or similar names in temporal research spanning over a century. Always with slightly different spellings, always with that same face, just at different ages. What are you saying? Ron asked, looking increasingly disturbed. That Cronius is some kind of immortal wizard jumping through time. I don't know, Hermione admitted. But something very strange is going on, and it's tied to everything that's happening with Voldemort and this Tempest prophecy. Harry's fingers closed around the probability compass in his pocket. It vibrated against his palm, the rings shifting rapidly between patterns. We need to see Dumbledore, he decided. Now. The gargoyle guarding the headmaster's office moved aside without Harry even giving the password, seemingly recognizing the urgency of their visit. When they reached the top of the spiral staircase, they found the door already open, voices carrying from within. Absolutely reckless. That was McGonagall, sounding more Scottish than usual in her anger. The timeline is already unstable, Albus. We cannot risk further disruption. I understand your concern, Minerva, Dumbledore replied calmly. But Artemis made his choice knowing the consequences. We must respect that. Respect it? He could be anywhere, anywhen. And with Voldemort pursuing the prophecy, she broke off as she noticed the 3 students hovering in the doorway. Potter. I might have known you'd be involved. I invited them, Minerva, Dumbledore said, rising from behind his desk. Harry at least deserves to understand what happened to Professor Cronius, given his role in last night's events. McGonagall pressed her lips into a thin line but nodded curtly. Very well. But remember what we discussed about the dangers of foreknowledge. She swept past them, pausing briefly to place a hand on Harry's shoulder in an uncharacteristic gesture of concern before continuing down the stairs. Dumbledore gestured for them to enter and take seats. The office looked different this morning. Several silver instruments that normally whirred and puffed on their spindly tables had been arranged in a complex formation on his desk. At the center sat what appeared to be a time turner, but larger and more intricate than the one Hermione had used in their 3rd year. I imagine you have questions, Dumbledore said, his blue eyes more serious than Harry had ever seen them. Professor Cronius, Harry began. Who is he really? We found a photograph from 1899. Dumbledore nodded. You've discovered part of the puzzle. Yes, Professor Cronius, or Cronus, or any of the dozen similar names he has used over the years, is indeed a temporal anomaly. A wizard unstuck from his proper place in time. That's impossible, Hermione said automatically, then blushed. I mean, In conventional magic, yes, Dumbledore agreed. But Artemis has never confined himself to conventional limitations. He was, is, will be, the foremost expert on chronomancy, the magic of time itself. Was. Is. Will be. Ron repeated, confused. That's just it, Mr. Weasley, Dumbledore said with a small smile. With Artemis, tenses become problematic. He exists across multiple points in the timeline simultaneously, sometimes experiencing them sequentially, sometimes not. Like a time-turner? Harry asked. Far beyond that, Dumbledore shook his head. A time-turner creates a closed loop, what happened, happened. Artemis's condition is different. He can move between potential timelines, observing and sometimes influencing outcomes. Hermione gasped. That's why he knew so much about the Mirror of Destiny. He's been seeing multiple futures his whole life. In a manner of speaking, Dumbledore nodded. Though I believe his relationship with the mirror is more complicated than that. What happened to him last night? Harry asked, remembering how Cronius had aged before his eyes after performing that strange magic. Dumbledore's expression grew grave. The magic Artemis used to save you both, temporal displacement, comes at an extraordinary cost. It accelerates the caster's personal timeline, aging them proportionally to the distance traversed. When he arrived in my quarters, he had aged decades in minutes. Is he? Harry couldn't bring himself to finish the question. Dead? No, though perhaps that might have been easier for him. Dumbledore sighed deeply. As his body reached what should have been its natural end, a failsafe he had prepared activated. He was pulled out of our timeline entirely, cast adrift in what he calls the temporal void, the space between potential realities. Ron looked completely lost. So he's nowhere. Or everywhere, Dumbledore corrected. It's difficult to explain within the constraints of language, which insists on linear time. The important thing is that Artemis sacrificed his anchor to our timeline to save Harry's life. That was a deliberate choice, and one I suspect he had anticipated making for some time. Harry felt a twist of guilt. Another person who had suffered because of him. Can he come back? Perhaps, though not as we knew him. Dumbledore gestured to the complex arrangement of instruments on his desk. I am attempting to establish a connection to the void, to learn what he knows about Voldemort's pursuit of the Tempest prophecy. So far, without success. The probability compass suddenly grew warm in Harry's pocket. When he withdrew it, the rings were spinning rapidly, occasionally aligning into patterns too quick to interpret before shifting again. The compass, Harry said, holding it up. Cronius made it. Could it help reach him? Dumbledore's eyes lit up. Of course. The compass maintains a connection to its creator. May I? Harry handed it over. Dumbledore placed it carefully among the other instruments, adjusting their positions slightly to accommodate it. The compass's rings began to spin faster, and the other devices responded, whirring and clicking in a complex rhythm. For a tense minute, nothing seemed to happen beyond the increasingly frantic activity of the instruments. Then, suddenly, the air above the desk shimmered and distorted, forming a misty window through which they could see nothing. Not darkness, but an absence, a void that somehow hurt to look at directly. Artemis? Dumbledore called, his voice steady despite the strain evident on his face as he maintained the connection. Can you hear us? The void rippled, and a voice emerged, or perhaps it wasn't a voice so much as the impression of words forming directly in their minds. Albus. The connection is weak. Not much time. It was Cronius, but altered, his voice echoed strangely, as if coming from multiple directions at once. Voldemort has found fragments of the prophecy, Dumbledore said. We need to know his next move. The void rippled again. He seeks the nexus point. The moment when all possibilities converge. If he controls that moment, he controls all potential futures. When is this nexus point? Dumbledore pressed. Not when. Where? The original mirror of destiny. The source of all reflections. Harry leaned forward. I don't understand. We already found the mirror. No, Harry. The voice seemed to focus on him now. What you found was an echo. A shadow. The true mirror exists outside conventional time and space, at the convergence of all potential realities. Voldemort has learned how to access it through the fractured prophecy. How do we stop him? Hermione asked, unable to contain herself. There was a pause, and when the voice came again, it seemed weaker. The connection fractures. Too many possibilities diverging. But remember, the compass points to choice, not certainty. Trust yourself, Harry. When the moment comes. The voice faded, and the shimmering window collapsed in on itself with a sound like glass breaking. The instruments on Dumbledore's desk went still, including the probability compass, its rings frozen in a pattern resembling a crossroads. Well, Dumbledore said after a moment of silence, that was both more and less illuminating than I had hoped. The original mirror of destiny, Hermione repeated thoughtfully. Professor, what did he mean about echoes and shadows? Dumbledore sat back, looking suddenly tired. There is a theory in the study of magical artifacts that certain objects of great power aren't truly created but discovered, that they exist as a kind of platonic ideal outside our reality, and what we interact with are merely reflections of that true form. Like Plato's cave, Hermione nodded. We only see the shadows on the wall, not the actual objects. Precisely, Miss Granger. If this theory is correct, the mirror of destiny we found at Hogwarts is merely a physical manifestation of something far more fundamental, a window into the realm of pure possibility. And Voldemort wants to control it, Harry said grimly. To make his version of the future the only one possible. Yes, though I doubt even he fully understands the consequences of such an action. Dumbledore picked up the now still probability compass and handed it back to Harry. Forcing a single timeline when infinite possibilities should exist could tear apart the very fabric of reality. So how do we stop him? Ron asked. We don't even know where this true mirror is. No, but we know who might. Dumbledore turned to Harry. The compass, Harry. It was created by Artemis specifically for you, as a guide when choices matter most. I believe it may be able to lead you to the nexus point when the time comes. Harry closed his fingers around the silver device. It felt different now, heavier, more substantial somehow, as if it had absorbed something of Cronius's essence during the brief connection. And when will that be? He asked. Soon, I fear, Dumbledore replied. Voldemort's recent actions suggest he is moving rapidly toward his goal. The raid on the Department of Mysteries was likely the final piece he needed. But sir, Hermione interjected, you're not suggesting Harry should face Voldemort alone at this nexus point? Not alone, no. Dumbledore's gaze moved from Harry to Ron and Hermione. I have observed over the years that you three accomplish remarkable things together. I see no reason to separate you now, when the stakes are highest. But, Harry began. I know what you're going to say, Harry, Dumbledore held up a hand. That you don't want to risk your friends' lives. That the prophecy speaks of you and Voldemort, not them. But consider this, in a battle over multiple possible futures, having multiple perspectives may be your greatest advantage. The probability compass warmed in Harry's hand, its rings shifting into a pattern that somehow conveyed agreement. There's something else you should know, Dumbledore continued, his tone growing even more serious. Professor Cronius left something for you before he was displaced. He seemed to know it would happen. The headmaster opened a drawer in his desk and withdrew a small crystal vial containing swirling silver memories. He asked that you view these alone, when you felt the time was right. He was most insistent on that point. Harry took the vial, feeling its weight in his palm alongside the compass. Did he say what they were? Only that they would help you understand the true nature of choice and consequence. Dumbledore gestured to the pensieve sitting in its cabinet. You may use that when you're ready. For now, I suggest you three return to Gryffindor Tower and prepare yourselves. Pack as if for a journey, though I cannot tell you where it might lead. You think it'll happen that soon? Ron asked, looking alarmed. Time has become increasingly unstable since the events of last night, Dumbledore replied. I can feel the ripples spreading outward, disturbing the normal flow of causality. When the nexus point manifests, I suspect it will do so suddenly and without warning. As if to confirm his words, the castle suddenly trembled beneath their feet, a subtle vibration that lasted only seconds but left a strange, disorienting sensation in its wake. What was that? Hermione gasped. A temporal aftershock, Dumbledore said grimly. The first of many, I fear. Go now, and be vigilant. I will alert the Order and make what preparations I can. As they left the office, Harry felt the weight of the crystal vial in one pocket and the probability compass in the other, both gifts from a man who had sacrificed himself to save Harry's life, a man who existed across time itself. What secrets did those memories hold? And when would be the right time to view them? The compass offered no answers, its rings now spinning slowly but never settling into a clear pattern, as if the futures before them were too volatile to predict. Back in the Gryffindor common room, Harry, Ron, and Hermione huddled in a corner, speaking in hushed tones despite the noisy crowd of students speculating wildly about the night's events and the strange tremor that had shaken the castle. We should pack like Dumbledore said, Hermione insisted. Basic supplies, healing potions, anything that might be useful. For what? Ron argued. We don't even know where we're going or when this nexus point thing will happen. That's exactly why we need to be prepared for anything, Hermione countered. Harry, what do you think? But Harry was only half listening, his attention focused on the probability compass in his hand. The silver device seemed different now, more alive somehow, its rings occasionally pulsing with a faint bluish light as they spun and realigned. Harry? Hermione prompted again. Sorry, he looked up. Yeah, packing makes sense. But there's something I need to do first. He withdrew the crystal vial from his pocket. Cronius left me these memories. I think I should view them now, before anything else happens. We'll come with you, Ron said immediately. Harry shook his head. Dumbledore said Cronius was specific about me viewing them alone. That sounds ominous, Hermione frowned. Are you sure it's safe? No, Harry admitted. But I trust him. Whatever he wanted to show me, he thought it was important. At least take the map and check in with us after, Ron insisted. If you're not back in an hour, we're coming to find you. Harry agreed and slipped away from the common room, making his way to the 7th floor. The room of requirement seemed the most private place to use the pensieve he would need. As he paced before the blank wall, focusing on his need, he couldn't shake a sense of déjà vu. Hadn't he done this before? Or was it just the lingering effects of the temporal instability Dumbledore had mentioned? The door materialized, and Harry entered to find exactly what he needed, a small, plain room containing a stone pensieve identical to the one in Dumbledore's office. No distractions, nothing but the tools required to view Cronius's memories. With slightly shaking hands, Harry uncorked the vial and poured its silvery contents into the pensieve. The memories swirled, neither liquid nor gas, shimmering with an unusual blue-gold tint unlike any he'd seen in Dumbledore's memories. Taking a deep breath, he leaned forward and plunged his face into the swirling surface. The sensation of falling was familiar, but what awaited him was not. Instead of landing in a memory, Harry found himself in a vast, empty space, white in all directions, with no visible boundaries or features. Before him stood Professor Cronius, looking much as he had when Harry first met him, though his eyes seemed to hold more depth, more awareness. Hello, Harry, Cronius smiled. If you're viewing this, then events have proceeded much as I foresaw. My physical form has been displaced from your timeline, and Voldemort is moving to seize control of the Nexus Point. Professor, Harry began, then stopped, realizing this wasn't really Cronius but a memory construct, a pre-recorded message that couldn't hear or respond to him. This is not a conventional memory, Cronius continued, as if reading his thoughts. The nature of my existence allows me to create something more interactive. I cannot truly hear you, but I have anticipated your most likely questions and structured this experience accordingly. The white void around them shifted, resolving into a familiar setting, the astronomy tower at Hogwarts, though subtly different from the one Harry knew. I owe you an explanation, Harry, Cronius said, gesturing for Harry to sit on a bench that hadn't been there a moment before. About who I am, why I came to Hogwarts, and what connection I have to the events now unfolding. The scene around them shifted again, showing a much younger version of Cronius working in what appeared to be the Department of Mysteries, surrounded by time-turners and other temporal devices. I began as a simple researcher, the memory Cronius explained. Fascinated by time and its mysteries. In my youth, I discovered references to a primordial artifact, the original Mirror of Destiny, from which all prophecies, all divination, all glimpses of what might be ultimately derive. The scene changed to show a younger Cronius standing before an ornate archway inscribed with symbols Harry didn't recognize. I found a way to reach it, Cronius continued. To step outside conventional time and glimpse the nexus point where all possible futures converge. But I was unprepared for what I found there. The scene shifted dramatically, showing a blinding light and the younger Cronius being thrown backward, his body seeming to fracture into multiple overlapping versions of himself. The experience shattered my connection to linear time, the present Cronius explained as they watched his younger self writhe in apparent agony. I became unstuck, existing at multiple points in the timeline simultaneously, seeing countless potential futures unfold in parallel. The scene dissolved, returning to the white void. Cronius turned to face Harry directly, his expression grave. At first, I thought it a curse. Later, I came to see it as a responsibility. With my unique perspective, I could identify critical moments, nexus points in individual lives and in history, where choices would determine which of many possible futures would manifest. Images flashed around them, Cronius at different ages, in different eras, always watching from the shadows as pivotal historical events unfolded. I learned to make small interventions. A word here, a suggestion there. Never directly interfering, but nudging events toward more positive outcomes when possible. The images settled on a familiar scene, Harry as an infant, in the ruins of his parents' house in Godric's Hollow, Hagrid picking up his crying form as Sirius Black argued to take custody. Your life, Harry, represents one of the most significant nexus points I have ever encountered, Cronius said softly. The choices surrounding you, made by you and about you, ripple outward to affect countless futures. Is that why you came to Hogwarts? Harry found himself asking, though he knew this wasn't a real conversation. To guide my choices. As if in answer, Cronius nodded. I have observed many versions of your life, Harry. In some, Voldemort is defeated early. In others, he triumphs completely. In most, the conflict between you continues far longer, with greater casualties and suffering than you can imagine. The void filled with rapid flashes of possible futures, Harry dead at Voldemort's feet, Harry victorious but surrounded by the bodies of friends, Harry older, leading an underground resistance against a world conquered by darkness. When I learned that Voldemort had discovered the existence of the original mirror, I knew I had to intervene more directly. If he reaches the nexus point and forces a single future, his preferred future, the consequences would be catastrophic not just for your world, but for all potential realities. So you became our defense teacher, Harry said, understanding dawning. To prepare us. To guide me toward the Mirror of Destiny so I'd understand what Voldemort was after. Again, Cronius nodded as if hearing him. My interventions had to be precise. Too much knowledge too soon would be as dangerous as no knowledge at all. I needed you to understand the power and limitations of foreknowledge gradually. The scene shifted again, showing the probability compass being created, Cronius pouring what looked like his own memories into the silver device as he crafted it. The compass contains fragments of my temporal awareness, he explained. It cannot show you the future directly, but it can help you recognize moments when your choices matter most, when multiple significant futures hinge on your decisions. Cronius stepped closer, his expression intensely serious. Harry, what you must understand is this: foreknowledge is both power and trap. Seeing possible futures can guide your actions, but becoming fixated on a single outcome, even a desirable one, blinds you to other possibilities that might be equally valuable. The white void began to show scenes from Harry's final glimpse in the Mirror of Destiny, his ultimate victory over Voldemort in the Great Hall. But now, alongside it, other variations of the same scene played out, different locations, different circumstances, different participants, but all ending with Voldemort's defeat. This is what Voldemort cannot accept, Cronius continued. That there are countless paths to his defeat, and relatively few to his victory. By seeking control of the Nexus Point, he hopes to eliminate all futures but the one he desires, a reality where his power is absolute and eternal. The multiple scenes faded, leaving them again in the empty white void. Cronius's expression softened slightly. You're wondering how to stop him. How to find the Nexus Point before he does. Yes, Harry said automatically, forgetting again that this wasn't a real conversation. The compass will guide you when the moment comes, Cronius said. But reaching the Nexus Point is only the beginning. Once there, you will face a choice more significant than any you have made before. The void around them darkened, taking on an ominous quality. Voldemort will offer you a vision, a future so perfect, so free of pain and loss, that refusing it will seem unthinkable. This is his true power, Harry. Not curses or dark magic, but the temptation of what might be. What kind of vision? Harry asked, but Cronius continued as if he hadn't spoken. You must remember that all futures come with a cost. Even the most beautiful possibility may require sacrifices you cannot foresee. Trust your instincts, Harry. Trust the compass. And most importantly, trust that your friends' perspectives matter, their presence at the Nexus Point will be crucial, though Voldemort will try to separate you from them. The void began to brighten again, and Cronius's form seemed to grow less substantial, more transparent. Our time grows short, he said, his voice beginning to echo strangely. One last thing, Harry. When you reach the Nexus Point, you may see me again, though perhaps not as you expect. Remember that time is not linear for me. The version of myself you encounter there may not be the same one you knew at Hogwarts. I don't understand, Harry said, frustration mounting as Cronius faded further. You will, came the reply, growing fainter. Trust yourself, Harry. When the moment comes to choose between what is seen and what is felt, remember, the present moment is all we truly have. The future, no matter how clearly glimpsed, is always in motion. With those final words, the memory dissolved completely, and Harry found himself flung back out of the Pensieve, gasping as if he'd been underwater. He staggered back, trying to process everything he'd just learned. Cronius wasn't just a wizard with unusual knowledge of time magic, he was a temporal anomaly, existing across multiple points in time simultaneously. He had been guiding Harry all along, preparing him for a confrontation at this mysterious Nexus Point where all futures converged. The probability compass felt almost hot in his pocket now. When he withdrew it, the rings were spinning rapidly, occasionally aligning into what looked like an arrow pointing nowhere. Or perhaps, Harry realized with a chill, pointing to a destination that didn't exist in conventional space. Another tremor shook the castle, stronger than the first, causing dust to fall from the ceiling. This time, the disorienting sensation that followed was more intense. For a brief, nauseating moment, Harry felt as if he were in multiple places simultaneously, seeing overlapping versions of the same room. He needed to get back to Ron and Hermione. Whatever was happening to the fabric of reality was accelerating, and based on Cronius's warning, they didn't have much time left. As he rushed back to Gryffindor Tower, Harry passed windows that showed impossible scenes, the grounds of Hogwarts as they might look in different seasons, different times of day, all superimposed on each other like double-exposed photographs. In one corridor, he ran through what felt like a pocket of slowed time, his movements becoming leaden and difficult for several steps before returning to normal. The castle was starting to panic. Students huddled in frightened groups as professors tried to maintain calm while clearly being unsettled themselves. Harry spotted Professor McGonagall directing younger students toward the Great Hall, her face tense with worry. "Potter," she called when she saw him. "The headmaster is looking for you. He's in the astronomy tower." "Thanks, Professor," Harry called back, changing direction. "Have you seen Ron and Hermione? They were headed there too, looking for you." McGonagall's expression softened briefly. "Be careful, Potter. The castle is unstable." That was putting it mildly. As Harry climbed toward the astronomy tower, he passed through areas where gravity seemed to function differently, where sounds echoed before they were made, where portraits showed people aging and de-aging in rapid cycles. The probability compass grew increasingly agitated, its rings spinning so quickly they became a silver blur. By the time Harry reached the top of the tower, it was vibrating violently in his hand. Dumbledore stood at the center of the open platform, accompanied by Ron, Hermione, and, surprisingly, Draco Malfoy. All four were looking up at the sky with expressions of awe and alarm. Harry followed their gaze and froze in shock. The clear afternoon sky had fractured. There was no other word for it. Great cracks ran across the blue expanse, revealing glimpses of other skies beyond, night skies with different stars, storm-filled skies, skies tinged with colors that shouldn't exist. "Harry," Dumbledore greeted him without looking away from the spectacle above. "I believe it's beginning." "The Nexus Point," Harry said, the compass nearly jumping out of his hand now. "Yes," Dumbledore nodded gravely. "The temporal instability is accelerating faster than I anticipated. Voldemort has found a way to access the original mirror." "How?" Harry asked. "And why is Malfoy here?" Draco looked pale but determined. "I can help, Potter. My father, he told me things. About where the Dark Lord was going, what he was planning." "Draco came to me voluntarily," Dumbledore confirmed. "His information suggests that Voldemort has used a combination of the Tempest Prophecy fragments and certain artifacts stolen from the Department of Mysteries to create a temporary gateway to the Nexus Point." "But where is it?" Ron asked, his voice unusually high as he stared at the fracturing sky. "How do we get there?" "That's where Harry's compass comes in," Dumbledore turned to Harry. "Professor Cronius designed it to lead you to the Nexus when the time came." Harry held up the wildly spinning compass. "It's going crazy. I can't read any pattern in it." "Because we're not at the right starting point," Hermione realized, her eyes lighting up with understanding despite her obvious fear. "The compass is like a directional guide, but we need to be at a specific location for it to show us the way." "Precisely, Miss Granger," Dumbledore nodded approvingly. "And I believe that location is where Harry first encountered the Mirror of Destiny." Another tremor shook the tower, far stronger than the previous ones. For a moment, Harry saw the structure around them flicker between different states, intact, ruined, rebuilt differently, never constructed at all. "We need to hurry," Dumbledore said, his usual calm somewhat strained. "The boundaries between potential realities are breaking down. If Voldemort succeeds in forcing a single timeline at the Nexus Point, the consequences will be catastrophic." They rushed down the tower stairs, which seemed to shift and reconfigure under their feet. The castle around them flickered between different versions of itself, sometimes older, sometimes newer, sometimes altered in ways that made no architectural sense. "This is mental," Ron muttered as they passed through a corridor that briefly transformed into an open-air walkway before returning to normal. "The whole castle's gone wonky." "It's not just the castle," Hermione replied grimly. "Reality itself is becoming unstable as the Nexus Point manifests." They followed Harry through the disintegrating landscape of Hogwarts, relying on his memory of where he'd first found the Mirror of Destiny. The journey was disorienting. Corridors ended differently than they began, staircases led to unexpected locations, and occasionally they passed through pockets where time seemed to flow at different rates. Finally, they reached the corridor where Harry had hidden from Filch that fateful night. To his relief, the door was there, exactly as he remembered it. "This is it," he said, reaching for the handle. "This is where I found the mirror." As soon as he touched the door, the probability compass went suddenly still in his other hand. When Harry looked down, he saw the rings had aligned into a perfect pattern resembling a doorway or portal. "It's ready," he told the others. "Whatever happens in there, we're with you, mate," Ron said firmly, though his face was pale. "All of us," Hermione added, taking his free hand and squeezing it. Malfoy said nothing but gave a curt nod, his jaw set in determination. Dumbledore placed a hand on Harry's shoulder. "Remember what you've learned about choice and consequence, Harry. Trust your instincts, not just what you see." Taking a deep breath, Harry pushed open the door. The small, dusty room he remembered was gone. In its place was nothing. A void of swirling mists and half-formed shapes, stretching endlessly in all directions. The only solid feature was a stone platform directly ahead of them, upon which stood an ornate mirror far larger and more intricate than the one Harry had found at Hogwarts. And before it, his skeletal back to them, stood Lord Voldemort. "Ah," the Dark Lord said without turning, his high, cold voice echoing strangely in the formless space. "Harry Potter. Right on schedule." He turned slowly, his snake-like face split in a terrible smile. "And you've brought friends. How predictable." Dumbledore stepped forward, placing himself between the students and Voldemort. "It's over, Tom. Step away from the mirror." Voldemort laughed, a sound devoid of joy or humor. "Over? It's only just beginning, old man. Look around you, we stand at the convergence of all realities, all possibilities. The power to reshape existence itself." He gestured to the mirror behind him, its surface swirling with countless images, futures branching endlessly, lives unfolding in infinite variations. "For too long, I have been constrained by the tyranny of what is," Voldemort continued. "But here, at the nexus point, I can choose what will be. A single reality, perfectly crafted to my specifications." Harry felt the probability compass grow cold in his hand. When he glanced down, its rings had formed a pattern like a shattered web, possibilities fracturing, collapsing. "You don't understand what you're doing," Dumbledore said, his voice calm but urgent. "Forcing a single timeline would destroy the balance of all realities. The consequences, I understand perfectly," Voldemort cut him off. "The consequences for those who oppose me will be oblivion. The consequences for those who serve me will be a world remade in my image." He turned back to the mirror, raising his wand. "Watch, Dumbledore, as I erase every future where you succeed, every possibility where your precious boy who lived fulfills his supposed destiny." As Voldemort began a complex incantation, the void around them trembled. The shifting mists grew more chaotic, forming and reforming into glimpses of potential realities, some beautiful, some horrific, all unstable and fracturing. Dumbledore raised his wand, and a battle unlike any Harry had witnessed began. Spells of impossible complexity flew between the two wizards, warping the fabric of the void itself. Where their magic collided, time seemed to fracture and reform, creating pockets of accelerated or reversed causality. "We have to help," Ron shouted, drawing his wand. But before any of them could move, the space around them shifted. Harry found himself suddenly separated from the others, standing alone on a small island of stability while his friends appeared to be frozen in time, visible but unreachable. "Harry Potter," Voldemort's voice came from behind him. "Always the center of events beyond your understanding." Harry spun around, wand raised, to find himself face to face with Voldemort, yet Voldemort was also still dueling with Dumbledore 30 feet away. "A projection," the Voldemort before him explained, seeing his confusion. "One of many advantages of this unique location. I can exist in multiple states simultaneously here." What do you want? Harry demanded, keeping his wand steady despite his fear. To offer you a choice, Voldemort replied, his red eyes gleaming. Before I consolidate reality to my preference. He gestured, and the mists around them resolved into a scene so vivid and real that Harry almost felt he could step into it, his parents, alive and well, in a home he somehow recognized as Godric's Hollow. A younger version of himself, perhaps 10 or 11, laughing as James taught him to fly a broomstick while Lily watched fondly from a garden bench. This could be your reality, Harry, Voldemort said softly. One where I never came to Godric's Hollow that night, where your parents lived to raise you in peace and happiness. The scene shifted, showing Harry at Hogwarts, but a different Hogwarts, one where he was just a normal student, without the burden of being the boy who lived. There was Sirius, visiting on Hogsmeade weekends. Cedric Diggory, alive and graduating. No Triwizard Tournament, no graveyard, no Department of Mysteries. All the pain, all the loss you've endured, Voldemort continued, erased as if it never happened. Your godfather alive. Your friend Diggory never murdered. A life of normalcy and joy instead of struggle and grief. Harry felt his throat tighten. The scenes before him were everything he'd ever dreamed of, every deepest desire he'd seen in the mirror of Erist made real and attainable. What's the catch? He managed to ask, though his voice was hoarse with emotion. Voldemort smiled thinly. Merely your non-interference. Stand aside, allow me to complete the ritual, and this reality can be yours. I will even spare your friends, allow them to exist in this new timeline with their own happiness intact. The probability compass in Harry's hand had gone completely still, its rings forming a pattern he'd never seen before, concentric circles around a central point, like ripples from a stone dropped in water. And everyone else? Harry asked. All the other futures, all the other possibilities. Irrelevant, Voldemort dismissed with a wave of his hand. Why should you care about abstract potentialities when your happiness, your family, can be concrete and real? Harry looked back at the scene of his parents, so vivid he could almost hear his mother's laugh, almost feel his father's hand on his shoulder. Everything he'd ever wanted, right there for the taking. Then he glanced at his frozen friends, Ron, Hermione, even Malfoy, all risking everything to stop Voldemort. He thought of Cronius's warning about temptation, about the cost of even the most beautiful possibilities. The compass warmed in his hand, and Harry understood what Cronius had meant about trusting what he felt over what he saw. No, he said quietly, then with more force, no. I won't help you destroy all other possibilities just to have the one I want. Voldemort's false sympathy vanished, replaced by cold fury. Then you will die in this reality and all others. The projection vanished, and Harry found himself back with his friends, who appeared confused, as if they'd experienced something similar. He showed you things, didn't he? Hermione asked breathlessly. Futures you wanted? Harry nodded grimly, seeing confirmation in their faces that they'd all been tempted with personalized visions. Meanwhile, the duel between Dumbledore and Voldemort had reached a critical point. The headmaster was clearly tiring, his movements slower, his spells less powerful, while Voldemort seemed to draw strength from the Nexus itself. We need to destroy the mirror, Harry realized, the compass pulsing in agreement. It's the focal point for all of this. How? Ron asked. We can't even get near it with those two throwing spells that bend reality. The compass grew suddenly hot, its rings spinning rapidly before settling into a clear arrow pattern, pointing not at the mirror, but at a shadowy figure that had appeared at the edge of their small pocket of stability. Cronius, Harry breathed, recognizing the tall form despite the distortions around him. But this wasn't the Cronius they had known at Hogwarts. This figure was older, more ethereal, his edges blurring into the void around them as if he weren't fully present in their reality. Harry, the figure acknowledged with a nod. You've done well to reach this point. Can you help us? Hermione asked desperately. Voldemort's winning. Not directly, Cronius said, his voice echoing strangely. My existence is too unstable here at the Nexus. But I can create an opportunity for you to act. He turned to Harry. The compass will guide you to the mirror's vulnerability. When I engage Voldemort, you must strike precisely where it indicates. But Dumbledore, Harry began. Is buying us time, but cannot win this battle, Cronus cut him off. The headmaster understands what must happen. As if hearing his name, Dumbledore glanced their way. For a brief moment, his eyes met Harry's, and he gave an almost imperceptible nod before redoubling his efforts against Voldemort, forcing the Dark Lord to focus entirely on their duel. What about us? Ron demanded, gesturing to himself, Hermione, and Malfoy. What do we do? Form a circle around Harry, Cronus instructed. Your combined magic will stabilize reality enough for him to approach the mirror. Each of you represents a different potential future. Together, you embody the very choice Voldemort seeks to eliminate. They moved quickly, positioning themselves around Harry. As they raised their wands, Cronus seemed to gather himself, his form becoming temporarily more solid. Now, he shouted, and launched himself toward the dueling wizards. What happened next was almost too fast to follow. Cronus collided with Voldemort in a burst of temporal energy that momentarily froze both the Dark Lord and Dumbledore in a bubble of suspended time. The void around them shuddered, and Harry felt the compass nearly leap from his hand, pulling him toward the mirror. Go! Hermione urged, her wand trained on Harry, creating what felt like a tunnel of stability through the chaos. Harry ran forward, through the suspended duel, toward the massive mirror. Its surface churned with countless futures, infinite possibilities all converging and diverging in patterns too complex to comprehend. The compass burned in his hand, its rings locked into a targeting pattern that pointed to a specific point on the mirror's golden frame, a small node where several ornate carvings intersected to form what looked like a temporal rune. Without hesitation, Harry pressed the compass directly against the spot. The moment they touched, both artifacts resonated with a pure, clear note that cut through the chaos around them. No! Voldemort's scream broke through the temporal bubble, his fury giving him the strength to break free of Cronus's hold. But it was too late. Cracks spread across the surface of the mirror, not destroying it but transforming it. The swirling futures within began to stabilize, separating into distinct channels rather than a chaotic maelstrom. What have you done? Voldemort howled, lunging toward Harry with his wand raised. Dumbledore intercepted him with a spell that forced the Dark Lord back. He's restored balance, Tom. The Nexus will no longer allow a single timeline to dominate all others. The void around them was changing, the formless mists resolving into a structured space that resembled a vast, circular chamber with the now transformed mirror at its center. The fractured futures visible in its surface had organized themselves into clearly defined paths, each distinct yet connected to the others. Cronus, who had been thrown clear by Voldemort's breakout, pulled himself up, his form more stable in the reorganized space. Well done, Harry. You've stabilized the Nexus point, preserved the multiplicity of futures that should exist. Voldemort wasn't defeated, however. With a snarl of rage, he cast a spell directly at the transformed mirror, attempting to shatter it completely. The spell rebounded, striking him squarely in the chest and throwing him backward. When he struggled to his feet, his form seemed less substantial, as if he were losing his anchor to this place. This isn't over, Potter, he hissed, his red eyes burning with hatred. There are still infinite futures where I triumph, where your pathetic resistance fails. Yes, Harry agreed calmly, the compass warm and steady in his hand. And infinite futures where you fail. That's the point. No one should control all possibilities. Voldemort's face contorted with fury and disbelief. With a final scream of rage, his form dissolved, expelled from the Nexus point by the rebalanced forces of possibility. The chamber fell silent except for their heavy breathing. Dumbledore looked exhausted but satisfied, while Cronus's form was becoming increasingly transparent again. Is it over? Ron asked cautiously. Did we win? We prevented catastrophe, Dumbledore corrected gently. Voldemort has been expelled from the Nexus, but he still exists in our timeline, still pursues his goals. But he can't control all futures now, Hermione said, understanding dawning. He's limited to working within a single reality again, like the rest of us. Precisely, Miss Granger, Cronius nodded approvingly. And that reality still contains hope, still offers paths to his ultimate defeat. Harry approached the transformed mirror, studying its surface with newfound understanding. He could see countless futures flowing like rivers, some merging, some diverging, but all part of a greater whole. One particular stream caught his attention, a future where he faced Voldemort in the Great Hall of Hogwarts, their spells connecting in golden light before the Dark Lord fell, defeated at last. It was the same vision he'd glimpsed in the Mirror of Destiny at Hogwarts, but now he could see the countless choices and events that led to that moment, the intricate web of possibilities that made it one potential outcome among many. I see it, he said softly. The future where we win. But I also see others where we don't. That is the nature of true reality, Harry, Dumbledore said, coming to stand beside him. Nothing is guaranteed. Every victory must be earned through choices made in the present moment. Cronius, now barely visible, nodded in agreement. The Mirror of Destiny showed you glimpses, Harry. Now you understand why such glimpses are both valuable and dangerous. Knowing a future is possible can give hope, but fixating on a single outcome blinds us to other paths, other choices that might prove equally valuable. So what do we do now? Malfoy asked, speaking for the first time since they'd entered the Nexus. Go back and just, keep fighting him. With greater wisdom, Dumbledore affirmed. Understanding that each choice we make narrows some paths and opens others, but never eliminates all possibilities. The chamber around them began to fade, the Nexus point receding as reality stabilized. Our time here is ending, Cronius observed. The Nexus is returning to its natural state, inaccessible to normal existence. What about you? Harry asked, turning to the fading figure. Will you return with us? Cronius shook his head, a sad smile on his transparent face. My place is here, Harry. Between possibilities, guiding but never dictating. The temporal displacement I suffered has made it impossible for me to exist in a single timeline again. But I'll see you again. Harry pressed, surprised by how much the thought of losing this strange mentor affected him. In one form or another, Cronius assured him. Time is rarely as linear as we perceive it. Our paths may cross again when choices matter most. He gestured to the probability compass in Harry's hand. That remains connected to me, a guide when you face moments of significant decision. Use it wisely. The chamber was almost completely transparent now, reality reasserting itself around them. They could see glimpses of Hogwarts through the fading void. Remember, Harry, Cronius said as he faded from view, the future is always in motion, shaped by choices made in the present moment. That is both our greatest responsibility and our greatest freedom. With those final words, the Nexus point collapsed entirely. Harry found himself standing in the small, dusty room where he'd first discovered the Mirror of Destiny, surrounded by his friends and Dumbledore. The room was empty now, no mirror, no trace of the portal to the Nexus they had just experienced. The only proof it hadn't been a dream was the probability compass in Harry's hand, still warm and alive with possibilities, its rings now forming a pattern that somehow conveyed both closure and new beginnings. Well, Ron said after a moment of stunned silence, that was bloody intense. Hermione let out a slightly hysterical laugh that broke the tension. Even Malfoy managed a small, incredulous smile. Indeed, Mr. Weasley, Dumbledore agreed with a twinkle returning to his tired eyes. I believe that qualifies as bloody intense by any standard. Harry looked down at the compass, feeling its reassuring weight in his palm. It's really over, isn't it? The mirror, the Nexus point. That particular crisis, yes, Dumbledore nodded. But Voldemort remains, and our struggle continues. However, I believe we have gained something valuable from this experience, a deeper understanding of choice and consequence, of the power and limitations of foreknowledge. As they made their way back through Hogwarts, Harry noticed that the castle had stabilized. No more temporal anomalies, no fractured skies or shifting corridors. Reality had returned to its normal flow, with all the uncertainty and possibility that entailed. Students and staff were emerging from the great hall where they'd been gathered during the crisis, looking confused but relieved. Professor McGonagall was already organizing prefects to escort everyone back to their common rooms, efficiency returning along with normal time. "I suspect," Dumbledore said quietly to Harry as they watched normalcy resume, "that most will remember today's events as a magical anomaly, a strange occurrence quickly contained. Few will understand what truly happened or how close we came to catastrophe." "Maybe that's for the best," Harry replied, thinking of the burden that knowledge of multiple futures could become. "Some things are easier to face when you don't see all the possibilities." Dumbledore smiled approvingly. "Wisdom beyond your years, Harry. Though I would add that seeing possibilities can provide hope when the present seems darkest. Balance in all things, including knowledge." As they reached the entrance hall, Malfoy separated from their group. "I should go," he said awkwardly. "The other Slytherins will be wondering where I disappeared to." Harry extended his hand. "Thanks for your help, Malfoy. We couldn't have done it without you." Looking surprised, Draco hesitated only briefly before shaking Harry's offered hand. "Don't get used to it, Potter," he said, but without his usual malice. "We still have reputations to maintain." "Of course," Harry agreed with a small smile. "Wouldn't want anyone thinking we're friends or anything mad like that." Malfoy gave a curt nod and headed toward the dungeons, but there was something different in his posture, a weight lifted, a choice made. "A significant nexus point for young Mr. Malfoy," Dumbledore observed quietly. "His future paths have shifted considerably today." "Speaking of futures," Hermione said, "what happens to Professor Cronius's position now? Will we get another defense teacher?" "I believe I can manage the defense classes for the remainder of the term," Dumbledore replied. "Though we should perhaps leave Professor Cronius's office undisturbed. One never knows when a wizard who exists outside conventional time might need his belongings." With that cryptic remark, the headmaster bid them good night and departed, leaving Harry, Ron, and Hermione alone in the entrance hall. "Mental," Ron said again, shaking his head. "Absolutely mental. Even by our standards." "I need to research temporal theory properly," Hermione said, already thinking ahead. "There must be books on multiple realities, on choice theory and temporal causality." Harry smiled, feeling a profound gratitude for his friend's predictability in the face of the completely unpredictable. Some things remained constant across all possible futures. Later that night, as Harry lay in his four-poster bed listening to Ron's gentle snores, he took out the probability compass one more time. Its rings spun lazily in the moonlight filtering through his curtains, occasionally forming patterns that hinted at possibilities without revealing them directly. He thought about Cronius's final words about the future always being in motion, shaped by choices made in the present moment. About Dumbledore's observation that foreknowledge could provide hope but shouldn't become fixation. About the countless futures he'd glimpsed in the transformed mirror, some bright, some dark, all possible. The compass warmed in his hand, its rings settling briefly into a simple pattern that somehow conveyed contentment, acceptance. Harry understood its message: the present moment was enough. Whatever futures lay ahead, he would face them as they came, one choice at a time. He slipped the compass under his pillow and closed his eyes. For the first time in months, he fell asleep without worrying about tomorrow's possibilities, content to let the future unfold at its own pace. In his dreams, he stood before the transformed mirror of destiny again, but this time he didn't focus on any specific future stream. Instead, he simply appreciated the beautiful complexity of possibilities flowing and shifting, an endless dance of choice and chance, hope and challenge. And somewhere in that infinite web of potential realities, a certain temporal anomaly named Cronius watched over the nexus points where futures converged, guiding but never dictating, preserving the precious freedom of choice that defined human existence across all possible timelines. Harry smiled in his sleep, somehow knowing that whatever paths lay ahead, he wouldn't face them alone. And in this present moment, that knowledge was enough. The end. Thank you for watching this video. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video.